Chapter 1788. 300 kilometers away from Snow Listening Peak, three figures stood tall. Two of them were Xiang Yin and her sister. Xian Yu's body trembled slightly, although she had long heard of the terrifying power of the red talisman produced by the lesser humans. This was the first time she had seen it with her own eyes. In front of such a terrifying power, even a late-stage moonjade cultivator seemed extremely weak. Xiang Yin's face flickered under the light of the blood moon. A trace of shame flashed through her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by determination. In such a place and in such an environment, her actions were all for the sake of survival. It had nothing to do with personal grudges. Besides, she had no grudges with Lu Yi. Standing in front of the two sisters was a man in a blood-red robe. His face was covered, and his face couldn't be seen clearly. Xian Yu had seen this person when she had followed Xiang Yin here. Although she didn't recognize this person, his attire undoubtedly revealed his identity, a cultivator from St. Blood Mountain. Moreover, he wasn't an ordinary cultivator from St. Blood Mountain. He had once betrayed the Red Talisman Association and turned to St. Blood Mountain. The Red Talisman he had just activated was something that the lesser humans had once bestowed upon them. Meng Su had told Lu Yi that they had been betrayed before. Those who had betrayed them weren't just those with weak minds. There were also cultivators who had once been considered brothers by them. They had been tested by the lesser humans for many years before coming here, and were trusted by the lesser humans. Hu Duquan was right. The resources brought in from the outside were limited. When one's own resources were used up, there was no way to replenish the energy they had expended. Many people couldn't bear the pleasure of having their cultivation weaken day by day. The only spirit jade mine in this realm was controlled by St. Blood Mountain. If they wanted to obtain resources, they could only rely on them. It was precisely because of these many years of bitter experience that Hu Duquan and the others had decided to kill Lu Yi after learning that he had been tainted by the divine essence. There was a historical reason for this. You've done well. Follow me back to the mountain. The sacred sovereign will reward you, the red-robed cultivator said slowly. His aura was very weak. Even though he was a late-stage moonjade cultivator, activating a red talisman with all his strength consumed an enormous amount of energy, especially since this red talisman had been nourished in his body for nearly 1,000 years. However, in order to kill Lu Yi in a single strike, he didn't dare hold back. According to Xiang Yin's information, as well as the information he obtained from the two loose cultivators nearby, this newcomer possessed a terrifying level of holiness. It was a level that even holy sages couldn't reach. It was precisely because of this that Saint Venerable Blazing Sky had spared no expense to send him to deal with this matter, using the red talisman. Otherwise, how could a strategic weapon like the red talisman be used so easily? If it weren't for the fact that Blazing Heaven was wary of the other party's divine nature, wouldn't it be safer for him to personally take action? Now that the entire Snowhere Peak had been razed to the ground, all of the mid-moon Jade Realm cultivators who had been trapped there were dead. Thank you, Taoist brother. Thank you, Lord. Xiang Yin pursed her dry red lips. She didn't look too happy. I need to recover for a while. Stand guard for me, the red-robed cultivator ordered, then sat down cross-legged. However, at that moment he suddenly sensed something. He turned his head and saw a figure leisurely flying towards him from that direction. The figure looked unfamiliar. It was a young man with a long saber hanging from his waist. It was obvious that he was a weapon cultivator. His magic power fluctuations weren't too strong either. He was only a mid-stage Moon Jade Realm cultivator. In this world, a mid-stage Moon Jade Realm cultivator was nothing. After all, there were plenty of late-stage Moon Jade Realm cultivators in this damned place. The red-robed cultivator was slightly stunned. He didn't know who this newcomer was. However, Xiang Yin, who was beside him, cried out in alarm. Her voice was filled with disbelief and fear. Then the red-robed cultivator heard Xiang Yin shout urgently, "Big sister, run!" As his magic power fluctuated, Xiang Yin and her sister's robes fluttered in the wind. They fled into the distance, as if they had encountered some dreadful monster. Unfortunately, they couldn't escape. Several rivers of blood formed by the precious blood swept over from all directions. As Lu Ye's figure approached, they surrounded the place. Xiang Yin still wanted to struggle, but the rivers of blood suddenly swelled and merged into one, forming a huge ball of blood that tightly surrounded the entire area. The center of the blood ball was bloodless. Xiang Yin and her sister's faces were also bloodless. After realizing that they couldn't escape, the two sisters had no choice but to land. They looked at Lu Yi, who was standing not far away, in horror. Xiang Yin's body trembled. She clenched her fists so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She couldn't understand how Lu Yi, who was only a mid-stage Moon Jade Realm cultivator, had managed to escape the might of the Red Talisman. Moreover, from the looks of it, he hadn't been affected by the power of the Red Talisman. The red-robed cultivator didn't know who Lu Yi was, but after seeing Xiang Yin and her sister's reaction, he immediately had a guess. Looking at Lu Yi, who was standing not far away, a trace of shame flashed through the red-robed cultivator's eyes. Originally, he could have stood on the same side as Lu Yi and called him a brother. Unfortunately, they had met in such a terrible way. "Which sector are you from?" he asked, a trace of calmness appearing on his face. If this newcomer's divine nature was as terrifying as he thought, then even if his cultivation was a minor realm higher than Lu Ye's, he would still be a fish on a chopping board. There was no point in resisting. Not to mention, he had consumed a great deal of energy, and his strength had been greatly reduced. For many years he had lived in pain. Because of his betrayal, he had no choice but to die. Perhaps it was a kind of relief. "The East," Lu Yi replied casually. The red-robed cultivator nodded slightly. "I'm from the South. My Dao companion is." Lu Yi raised a hand to stop him. "Don't say anything. I won't tell anyone about you." The red-robed cultivator was stunned for a moment before he said with relief, "That's good." As soon as he finished speaking, the remaining magic power in his body buzzed, and a purple light bloomed from his body. As expected, he was still unwilling to die like this. If he could face death calmly, he wouldn't have chosen to join St. Blood Mountain all those years ago. He had already used the red talisman, but he still had the purple talisman. After so many years of nourishment, the purple talisman's power was not as strong as the red talisman's, but it was still not to be underestimated. As long as he could activate the purple talisman's power, he would be able to resolve the crisis before him. As he activated the purple talisman, he shouted, "Attack together!" These words were undoubtedly for the Xiang Yin sisters to hear. However, just as his voice fell, the world suddenly buzzed. At the same time, the red-robed cultivator's body shrank, as if he was carrying a star on his back. His magic power stagnated. Not to mention that he was now an arrow at the end of its flight. Even if he was at his peak, under such terrifying suppression, he wouldn't even be able to use 30% of his strength. The red-robed cultivator's eyes widened. It was hard to imagine how someone in this world could possess such a terrifying divine nature. Compared to Blazing Heaven's divine nature, it was like a firefly competing with the bright moon. He had already learned about this from Xiang Yin in advance, and had even personally asked two nearby cultivators. However, what he heard and personally experienced were two completely different things. Some things couldn't be imagined without experiencing it personally. His vision darkened. When he looked up again, Lu Yi was already in front of him. With a flash of his blade, the red-robed cultivator's vision turned upside down, and then slowly turned dark. Lu Yi shook off the blood on his blade, and pushed away the red-robed cultivator's headless body. He expressionlessly looked at the Xiang Yin sisters. Xiang Yin's face was deathly pale, and her eyes were dim. Xianyu wasn't any better. The two sisters knew that today was a bad day. In terms of cultivation, the two sisters were stronger than Lu Yi. However, the suppression of the blood race's divine nature was just so unreasonable. They had already experienced it once. Now that Lu Yi had killed the red-robed cultivator, they didn't even have the slightest thought of resisting. Fortunately, Lu Yi didn't immediately kill them. He looked at Xiang Yin and said, "You gave me a map of this world and specifically marked out an area, hinting that I should go there to look for the Red Talisman Association. You want to borrow their hands to kill me, right?" The Red Talisman Association had methods to determine whether or not a cultivator was tainted by their divine nature. This shouldn't be a secret. Xiang Yin definitely knew about it. However, Lu Yi was new to this world, so how could he possibly know about this? Therefore, Xiang Yin had specifically marked out that she wanted to kill him with a borrowed knife. As long as Lu Yi came into contact with the Red Talisman Association, he wouldn't be able to escape death. In fact, it was very likely that Xiang Yin knew that the Red Talisman Association had set up many traps in that area. If Lu Yi didn't have a doppelganger or spatial spirit runes to help him, he would have been killed long before he met with Hu Duquan. Xianyu looked at Xiang Yin in astonishment. She clearly didn't know anything about this, and didn't understand why her sister would want to kill someone she didn't even know. Yes, Xiang Yin's hoarse voice sounded. Lu Yi nodded. She had the same thoughts as him. He couldn't understand why Xiang Yin had pointed him to that area. He originally thought that she had good intentions, but now it seemed that wasn't the case. After parting with Hu Duquan and the others, Lu Yi had some guesses. He'd especially come back to find Xiang Yin and her sister. Firstly, he had nowhere else to go, and secondly, he wanted to verify some things. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come to Snow Listening Peak. After I came here, you secretly contacted the Sacred Blood Mountain and left while the blood moon was still in the sky. In truth, you were afraid of being affected by the Red Talisman's might. You even deliberately gave me some false hints before you left. You wanted me to be trapped in Snow Listening Peak's grand formation, so that the Sacred Blood Mountain could easily kill me. Yes, Xiang Yin admitted. Do we have a grudge? Lu Yi looked at her. No grudge, Xiang Yin replied. Xiang Yin, who had been keeping her head down all this time, suddenly raised her head and looked directly into Lu Ye's eyes. Pursing her lips, she said, "This is just a little girl's way of survival." Now that things had come to this, any explanation or refutation was useless. Judging from Lu Ye's decisiveness and ruthlessness, Xiang Yin knew that she wouldn't be able to escape death today, so her expression became much calmer. I plotted against you and betrayed you because I wanted to live a better life. That's all. End of chapter. Chapter 1789. What a woman's way of survival. What a good that's all. Are you using me as a bargaining chip? Lu Yi already knew what Xiang Yin was thinking. Xiang Yin smiled bitterly. You've just arrived here, so you have no idea how difficult it is to survive in this damned place. Among us sisters, which one of us is weaker than Zhou Ran and Wang Taisheng? But because we've long since run out of cultivation resources, our strength has slowly become inferior to theirs. In the long run, we'll have to rely on others to survive. We're women, and we're quite beautiful. Do you know what this means? If we want to survive, we have to find a way to obtain resources. We can't join the Red Talisman Association, so our only choice is St. Blood Mountain. That blazing heaven is also a lecher, so if we don't have enough bargaining chips, we sisters will end up in a miserable state. Your existence is a threat to blazing heaven, so if we can get rid of you, it will undoubtedly be a great merit. Even if we join him, we'll definitely be treated well. I hinted you to go to that area to find the Red Talisman Association, because I wanted to borrow their hands to get rid of you. But I didn't expect you to return alive. St. Blood Mountain had no choice but to send another person over, but they failed again. Xiang Yin's face was filled with bitterness. She really couldn't understand why things had turned out this way. Her plan had been perfect, but the result was completely unsatisfactory. Xiang Yin suddenly knelt down and looked at Lu Yi. I know I can't escape death, but I acted on my own initiative. It has nothing to do with Big Sister. She didn't know anything about it from beginning to end. Big Sister's temperament is cold, but her heart is kind, so I begged Dao Brother to spare her life. This young woman will kowtow to you. As she spoke, she actually kowtowed in Lu Ye's direction, each kowtow extremely forcefully. A dignified late-stage Moon Jade Realm cultivator, doing such a thing was truly lamentable. If it were only because she was about to die, Xiang Yin wouldn't have lowered her head like this. She would have just stuck out her neck and kowtowed. But she knew that if she couldn't satisfy Lu Yi, Profound Fish wouldn't be able to escape calamity after her death. She took responsibility for her own mistakes, but she didn't want to implicate Xianyu. Xianyu hurriedly knelt down as well. While pulling her sister, she looked at Lu Yi pleadingly. Fellow Taoist, My sister was muddle-headed for a moment. I hope that fellow Taoist will spare her life on account that she didn't commit a grave mistake. From now on, we two sisters will be your slaves, your dogs, and your horses. Xianyu begged. Tears blurred her eyes. She had lived for so many years, but she had never been so lowly. She had a cold personality, so she couldn't do such a lowly thing. She even looked down on people who did such things. But when her sister's life was hanging by a thread, her insistence and ideals instantly collapsed. At this moment, as long as Lu Yi could say the word good, she was willing to do anything. Unfortunately, Lu Yi only looked at her indifferently. I didn't make a big mistake. That's because I'm lucky. It has nothing to do with her. As he said this, he continued to urge the suppression with his holiness. Holding the long saber, he walked step by step toward the two sisters kneeling on the ground. Xiang Yin felt like she was suffocating. She knocked her head so hard that it hurt, but she still begged. Brother, after I die, please spare my sister. Just treat her like you're raising a cat or a dog. Please don't kill her. What answered her was a flash of saber light. Xiang Yin felt a pain in her chest, and then her vision went dark. In the darkness, her consciousness floated. After a long time, when Xiang Yin opened her eyes again, the tip of her nose was surrounded by a familiar fragrance. She seemed to be lying in a soft embrace. She couldn't help but be stunned, but soon she recalled the terrifying flash of saber light, and couldn't help but tremble. You're awake. A low voice came. Xiang Yin's vision slowly focused, and she saw a weeping face right in front of her. Sister. Xiang Yin didn't know whether she was alive or dead. If she was dead, was her sister killed as well? Xianyu seemed to have seen through her thoughts. She whispered, You're not dead. That saber didn't take your life. Xiang Yin was stunned. Why? She recalled the scene before she fell unconscious. The murderous intent she felt was very real. Lu Yi really wanted to kill her, so she didn't understand why she wasn't dead. She couldn't say that Lu Yi had failed. After all, she hadn't resisted at all. Even if Lu Yi had failed, Lu Yi could have dealt the final blow. I don't know. Xianyu shook her head and looked to the side. Xiang Yin followed her gaze, and saw Lu Yi standing there, looking up at the moon. The great terror of being on the brink of death struck her again. She couldn't help but feel fear. She averted her gaze and lowered her head to look at her chest. There was a hole in her clothes and blood had dried up. However, her injuries had already healed. She was at the late stage of the Moon Jade realm, after all. It wasn't difficult for her to recover from physical injuries, even if she was unconscious. She smiled bitterly. Sister, I've implicated you. Xianyu shook her head. Don't say that. It's my fault. Xiang Yin said. But from the looks of it, I'm afraid we'll really have to work like cows and horses in the future. Lu Yi didn't have any reason to spare her life. Xiang Yin guessed that this was the first time he'd come here, and he was all alone. He was probably trying to recruit some helpers. The Red Talisman Association definitely wouldn't accept him, and the Sacred Blood Mountain had already made a move against him. As long as Blazing Heaven didn't get rid of Lu Yi, he wouldn't be able to rest easy. As such, the conflict between them was irreconcilable. In this current situation, Lu Yi was stuck between a rock and a hard place. It would be difficult for him to do anything by himself. Sparing the lives of the two sisters and recruiting them to his side was much better than fighting alone. It had to be said that Xiang Yin's mind was quite sharp. Lu Yi had indeed considered this when he had held back at the critical moment. In the entire inner world, the Red Talisman Association and the Sacred Blood Mountain were divided into two factions. But he couldn't join either. As such, he was forced to start from scratch. It was unrealistic to fight alone. The only helpers he could recruit now were the scattered cultivators like Xiang Yin and her sister. Moreover, there weren't many of them. Xiang Yin was a little smart and was a useful person. Moreover, she was strong enough. Most importantly, Xiang Yin had calmly accepted his sure-kill attack, without any intention of resisting. Moreover, there was no personal enmity between them. Xiang Yin's actions were indeed forced by the situation. She wanted to better survive here. This was the real reason why Lu Yi had spared her life at the last moment. The blood moon slowly dissipated. Lu Yi let out a breath, and closed his eyes to comprehend the various visualizations he had just made. He didn't have to worry about the rainbow divine lotus spoiling things. He had gained a lot this time, but there was still a long way to go before he could completely see through the Blood Eye Spirit rune. There was no rush. There would be more opportunities in the future. He walked to the side and sat on a large rock, thinking about his next plan. He would definitely start from scratch and target the Sacred Blood Mountain. Perhaps he could try to contact the Red Talisman Association again in the future and join forces with them. There were some things that couldn't be trusted by words alone. Actions would naturally be effective. Once he started to target the Sacred Blood Mountain, the Red Talisman Association would definitely receive the news. At that time, regardless of whether the Red Talisman Association believed him or not, they would be natural allies. Most importantly, he had to find a way to find out why the seal on this world would be lifted once the Red Talisman Association and the Sacred Blood Mountain were determined. This was related to escaping from this world. It was of the utmost importance. While he was deep in thought, he heard rustling sounds. He looked up and saw Xiang Ying crawling over on all fours. Xianyu tried to pull her up several times but failed. His expression was sorrowful and sad. Lu Yi looked at her expressionlessly. However, he had to admit that Xiang Yin's figure was very enchanting. There was a strange temptation when she crawled over in such a posture, especially when her head was half raised. It was unknown whether it was due to shyness or humiliation, but the blush on her face and the white skin on her neck formed a sharp contrast. The visual conflict was extremely intense. A moment later, Xiang Ying crawled to Lu Ye's feet. She sat up straight and lowered her head. Lu Yi looked at her indifferently. "What do you mean?" Xiang Ying said in a low voice. "Xiang Ying is willing to be your cat or dog. Thank you for not killing me." In order to save her sister's life, she had previously said something similar. She only wanted Lu Yi to raise Xianyu like a cat or dog. Now that she said this, it was obvious that she wanted to replace Xianyu with her body. Her act of crawling over on her knees was also a show of her sincerity. Lu Yi saw through her thoughts. He didn't feel too much pity for her. Xiang Ying had chosen to come to this point. She couldn't blame others. This woman had a good temperament. She could rise and fall with grace. If used well, she would definitely be useful. However, if used poorly, there was a risk of her betraying her master. Lu Yi especially couldn't show his weak side in front of her. He believed that as long as she had the chance, she would definitely return today's humiliation tenfold, or even 100-fold. "Did I say I wouldn't kill you?" Lu Yi asked. Xiang Ying raised her head in surprise. "But before, my hand shook. If I want you to die, I can kill you again at any time." Xiang Ying obviously didn't believe his words. What did he mean by his hand shaking? It was completely false. However, she really didn't understand what Lu Yi was thinking. She could only ask, "Then what do I have to do to satisfy you?" When she asked this, she intentionally or unintentionally revealed a touch of shyness. It was full of temptation. From the outside, everyone in the Snow Clan was pure as ice and jade. Xiang Yin's attitude at this moment was very harmful to any man. Lu Yi narrowed his eyes slightly. "If you dare to play any tricks in front of me again, I will kill your sister first." Xiang Yin's face suddenly became frightened. She immediately sat up straight and obediently said, "I won't dare. Please forgive me, brother." Lu Yi looked at her for a while, his heart uneasy. After a long time, she heard Lu Ye's voice. "If you want to live, it's simple. Refine this thing." End of chapter. Chapter 1790. Lu Yi had spared Xiang Yin's life for two reasons. First, he needed to recruit some subordinates. Xiang Yin was strong and smart enough, so she was a perfect candidate. Moreover, if he really killed Xiang Yin, he would have to kill Xianyu as well. Second, he had a way to control Xiang Yin. Naturally, he wanted her to refine his precious blood and turn her into a blood warrior. Once she became his blood warrior, he would no longer have to worry about Xiang Yin betraying him. At that time, she would be as loyal to him as Ma Shangxi. When the drop of blood appeared on Lu Ye's fingertip, it instantly attracted the attention of Xiang Yin and Xianyu. The two women both felt the powerful attraction this drop of precious blood had towards them. It was an instinctive desire, But at the same time, they could feel the terrifying danger contained within the precious blood. What is this? Xianyu asked. She had never seen precious blood before. If Yu Yao was a true member of the blood tribe, she definitely wouldn't ask such a childish question. Any true member of the blood tribe who had reached Yu Yao's level would be able to learn the truth about the treasured blood through different channels. However, they weren't true vampires in the end. They were only first-generation vampires, created by the special environment of the core world. Their understanding of vampires was based on the constant development of their own bloodline. As such, their understanding of vampires was very one-sided and fragmented. But no matter what it was, Xianyu realized that it wasn't easy to refine. It was definitely a method Lu Yi was using to control his sister. What surprised her even more was that this drop of blood contained an extremely powerful holy aura. This holy aura was even stronger than when they used their vampire's secret techniques. While she was still bewildered, Xiang Yin's expression suddenly became resolute. She moved forward while maintaining her kneeling position, opened her small mouth, and sucked on Lu Ye's finger. Her sudden action startled Lu Yi. Then, he felt a soft, fragrant tongue coiling around his fingertip a few times. It was itchy. Lu Yi looked up and met Xiang Yin's eyes. He could see the determination in them. She was a smart woman. She knew that she couldn't refuse him no matter what he said, so she might as well make her stand. But in the next instant, Xiang Yin's expression changed. Lu Yi pulled her finger out, got up and went to Xianyu. She grabbed her arm and said, "Let's go." He activated his magic power and flew into the distance. Xianyu didn't dare to resist. He turned to Xiang Yin and shouted, "Sister." The only response she received was Xiang Yin's blood-curdling screams, as a ball of dazzling golden light instantly enveloped the area around her. After a short while, Lu Yi landed on a mountain 100 miles away from Xiang Yin. He looked back, but Xiang Yin's figure was nowhere to be seen. There was only a sea of blood floating in the sea of blood. Golden light flashed in the sea of blood, and Xiang Yin's screams continued. Inside the sea of blood, her magic power fluctuated. Although Xianyu didn't know what was going on, he knew his sister was in a bad situation. He looked at Lu Yi nervously and asked, "What happened to Xiang Yin?" Lu Yi didn't want to answer at first, but he considered that if Xiang Yin succeeded in refining the treasure blood, the two sisters would have to work for him in the future. He explained, "Normally speaking, if a blood tribe member wants to obtain holiness, they have to refine holy blood. The so-called holy blood should be the blood left behind by the blood ancestor after his death. If a blood tribe member successfully refines it, they can call themselves a holy sovereign. Holy sovereigns have a very high status in the blood tribe, far surpassing ordinary blood tribe members. This is because their holiness can suppress ordinary blood tribe members, and the upper limit of their growth is also higher. However, the process of refining holy blood is incomparably dangerous, and there is a chance of death at any time." Xianyu's face paled. Daoist brother bestowed holy blood? Lu Yi didn't say anything. His precious blood was no different from saint blood. It wasn't wrong to call it saint blood. Back then, Ma Shangxi's process of refining precious blood was also extremely dangerous. Whether or not Xiang Yin could pass this trial would depend on her own luck. However, Lu Yi had a faint feeling that Xiang Yin wouldn't die so easily. This drop of treasure blood might bring her quite a bit of benefits. Lu Yi sat down cross-legged and thought back to his gains from observing the crimson moon. Xianyu stood not far in front of him. Her eyes were anxiously staring hundreds of kilometers away. Her slender hands were clenched so tightly that her fingernails dug into her flesh. After a short while, she seemed to have come to a decision and flew back into the sea of blood. Lu Yi opened his eyes and looked on in astonishment as her snow-white figure rushed into the sea of blood. Even though he could stop her, Lu Yi didn't. This was Xianyu's own decision. If he tried to stop her, it would only make her angry. Also, from his point of view, if Xiang Yin failed to refine the precious blood and died, he wouldn't be able to let Xianyu live. Since that was the case, it wasn't a bad choice to let the two sisters live and die together. After Xianyu also rushed into the sea of blood, Xiang Yin wasn't the only one screaming in pain. Time passed by. The two sisters' screams gradually subsided, and the golden light in the sea of blood disappeared. The sea of blood also slowly closed. When Lu Yi rushed back, he saw the two sisters hugging each other, their clothes disheveled, and their bodies drenched in sweat. They looked very miserable, especially Xianyu. Her face was full of fear. It was obvious that she had a very bad experience refining the treasure blood. On the other hand, although Xiang Yin's condition wasn't good, her eyes were very bright, as if a door to a new world had been opened. She curled up in her sister's arms and looked at Lu Yi, who was descending from the sky. Gasping for breath, she asked, "Is there more?" Lu Yi stared at her expressionlessly for a while, then said indifferently, "That depends on your performance in the future." Black Prison Cliff was where Demon Zhou Ran's cave residence was located. A great battle was breaking out, and the two sides fighting were Zhou Ran and Xiang Yin. Two figures were hiding in the sea of blood, making it difficult for others to see the situation clearly. However, judging from Zhou Ran's exasperated shouts, he was undoubtedly at a disadvantage. Moreover, it was an absolute disadvantage. At this moment, Zhou Ran was undoubtedly very shocked. Because he knew the details of the Snow Clan's sisters very well, they were no match for him in a one-on-one fight. But today's battle had surprised him. He had only fought with Xiang Yin for a moment, but he was already at a disadvantage, and the situation was getting worse and worse. The reason was that his own divine nature was suppressed, so he couldn't use his full strength. Zhou Ran didn't understand what was going on. When he was fighting with Xiang Yin a few days ago, her divine nature was no different from his. So why did she change so much in just a short period of time? The sea of blood suddenly dissipated, and the two sides fighting stood in the air. "Do you admit defeat?" Xiang Yin looked at Zhou Ran triumphantly. Zhou Ran was annoyed. How could he admit defeat? Suppressing his anger, he said, "Xiang Yin, we haven't interfered with each other for so many years. So why do you have to offend me today?" Xiang Yin pursed her lips and smiled. "Zhou Ran, let's not talk about the past anymore. From now on, the situation in this domain will change greatly. I know that you have been considering whether or not to join St. Blood Peak all these years, but I advise you to make a good choice." Zhou Ran was confused. What choice? Xiang Yin didn't say anything. She just turned her head and looked to the side. Zhou Ran followed her gaze and found that there were two more figures there. One was the human with a strong sense of holiness that she had seen before, and the other was Xianyu. However, at this moment, Xianyu was standing not far behind the young man like a maid. Zhou Ran was puzzled. As far as he knew, this young man had already left, so why had he come back? When facing Xiang Yin, he still had the courage to struggle, but when facing Lu Yi, he didn't even dare to think about it. The terror of the divine nature's suppression was still vivid in his mind, and he often felt his heart palpitate. "We sisters have already become the High Lord's subordinates, and we wish to help the High Lord in his great undertaking. We came to find you today to give you a chance. Zhou Ran, what will you choose?" This short sentence shook Zhou Ran. He immediately realized that this newcomer, who had just arrived in this realm, was someone who didn't want to be left out. He was ambitious. No wonder Xiang Yin said that the power structure of this realm would change. Yu Yao's middle stage cultivation wasn't much, but her terrifying divine nature was undoubtedly her greatest asset. This person's entry would definitely stir up the situation in this realm. Zhou Ran's thoughts turned, and he smiled bitterly. Do I have a choice? If he said a single word of no, he would immediately be suppressed to death. He sighed inwardly. He had persevered for several hundred years, but in the end, he still couldn't stand alone. However, he was mentally prepared to rely on others. Just as Xiang Yin had said, he had been considering whether or not to rely on the Sacred Blood Mountain. Only by relying on the Sacred Blood Mountain would he be able to obtain spirit jades to maintain his cultivation. Now, before he could even go to the Sacred Blood Mountain, he was going to be forcibly taken in. He looked in Lu Ye's direction and cupped his fists. Zhou Ran greets the High Lord. Lu Yi nodded slightly. Xiang Yin looked at Zhou Ran with a smile. Don't feel like you've lost out. Being able to serve the High Lord is a good thing that others can't even dream of. Do you know why my divine nature has improved so much recently? Zhou Ran's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? He had been wondering about this for a long time. Everyone's divine nature improved by bathing in the blood rain, or eating spirit plants that were watered by the blood rain. Thus, although some people had been in this realm for a long time, the difference between them wasn't that great. After all, bathing in the blood rain didn't bring much improvement. It was just a kind of accumulation. Xiang Yin's divine nature had improved so much, which was obviously abnormal. Combined with what she had just said, and the terrifying suppression Lu Yi had displayed, Zhou Ran couldn't help but think of something. Xiang Yin deliberately mystified him. That depends on your performance, Zhou Ran immediately declared. Since I've become the High Lord's subordinate, Zhou Ran will do anything for you. Xiang Yin continued. Let me tell you something else. Yesterday, the Sacred Blood Mountain sent a late-stage Yu Yao with a red talisman to assassinate the High Lord. In the end, the High Lord killed her. End of chapter. Chapter 1791. The explosion of the red talisman's power yesterday had caused a huge commotion. Zhou Ran naturally sensed it, but he didn't dare to investigate, because those who could use the red talisman were either from the Red Talisman Association or from St. Blood Mountain. How could he have a good ending if he got involved? At that time, he was worried about Xiang Yin and her sister because the commotion came from listening Snow Peak. But after hearing Xiang Yin's words, he learned that the one who used the red talisman was a late-stage Yu Yao from St. Blood Mountain. Not only did she fail to do anything to Lu Yi, she was even killed. To be able to survive the red talisman's power, and even kill the enemy, such strength was undoubtedly worth relying on. Looking at Lu Yi in awe, Zhou Ran said, Does High Lord plan to gather the people scattered outside? He was a smart person, so how could he not have guessed Lu Ye's intentions after seeing Xiang Yin and her sister come to him? That's right. Lu Yi nodded. Zhou Ran said, Since that's the case, we can't miss out on Wang Taixing. Although that old man is a little old, he's not weak. If High Lord is at ease, leave this matter to me. I have some personal relations with him. Xiang Yin immediately scolded. Zhou Ran, you and Wang Taixing don't get along well, so you were just putting on an act for us sisters. Zhou Ran chuckled. Your sisterly relationship is deep, so old Wang and I naturally have to form an alliance. Xiang Yin curled her lips. Look at your thick eyebrows and big eyes. It turns out you're also a cunning guy. After saying that, she turned to look at Lu Yi, waiting for his orders. Lu Yi thought for a moment, then said, Xiang Yin, come with me. Xiang Yin understood. Yes. She instantly understood why Lu Yi wanted her to come with him. If Wang Taixing wasn't willing to submit, then he would eliminate him completely. For Lu Yi, there were two forces in this world that he needed to contend with. His foundation was still shallow, so he had to eliminate all uncontrollable factors in advance to prevent Wang Taixing from joining St. Blood Mountain in the future and becoming his enemy. Xiang Yin and Zhou Ran left. Lu Yi and Xian Yu stayed at Black Prison Cliff for the time being. Half a day later, Xiang Yin returned. Zhou Ran and Wang Taixing also came back together. There weren't too many twists and turns on this trip. After Zhou Ran went to see Wang Taixing, she only said a few words to him, and Wang Taixing agreed to surrender. This made many of the words that Zhou Ran had prepared useless. Out of curiosity, Zhou Ran asked for the reason. Only then did Wang Taixing explain. It has always been rumored that after the Red Talisman Association and St. Blood Peak have a victor, the seal on this world will be broken. However, after so many years, even though St. Blood Peak has a huge advantage on the surface, they still haven't been able to destroy the Red Talisman Association. I'm afraid that Blazing Heaven doesn't have the ability to do so. This old man understands Blazing Heaven. He only has the advantage of being the first to enter this world. However, this newcomer is different. His future prospects are much brighter than Blazing Heaven's. Perhaps one day, he will be able to replace Blazing Heaven. When that time comes, the Red Talisman Association will have no reason to survive. Only then did Zhou Ran understand. In Wang Taixing's opinion, Lu Yi might be the key to destroying the Red Talisman Association in the future. Once the Red Talisman Association was gone, the seal on this world would be broken. At that time, the cultivators who were trapped here would naturally be able to leave. Zhou Ran thought about it carefully and found that Wang Taixing's words made a lot of sense. This made her even more determined to follow Lu Yi. In fact, in Wang Taixing's opinion, the most effective way was for Lu Yi to lead them to Saint Blood Peak and use the Saint Blood Peak's resources to cultivate and grow stronger. After all, if they were to fight against the Red Talisman Association, the blood race's divine nature would not be of any use. However, he knew that it was impossible for Blazing Heaven to allow Lu Yi to live under his nose. Coupled with the fact that he'd found out from Zhou Ran that Saint Blood Peak had already launched an attack against Lu Yi, it was even more impossible for Lu Yi to lead them to seek refuge with Saint Blood Peak. Wang Taixing only had one wish, and that was to leave this damned place before his lifespan ran out. In Black Prison Cliff, Lu Yi sat upright and looked at the 4 people on his left and right. In just 2 short days, he already had 4 great generals under his command, and each of them had strength at the late Moon Jade realm. Of course, there was no need to doubt the loyalty of Xiang Yin and her sister. However, Zhou Ran and Wang Taixing were different from them. Lu Yi had gathered people mainly to deal with the cultivators of Saint Blood Peak. Since this was the case, the divine nature of his subordinates was very important. After all, if they were to fight against Saint Blood Peak in the future, having a strong divine nature would give them a great advantage. Thus, the first thing Lu Yi needed to do was increase their divine nature. At the same time, he needed to eliminate the possibility that they would betray him in the future. As he was thinking, 2 drops of golden blood seeped out from his fingertips, and he flicked them towards Zhou Ran and Wang Taixing. He ordered, "Refine them." He didn't discuss anything with them. Although this was very risky, and might even cause Zhou Ran and Wang Taixing to pay with their lives, the current situation did not allow him to be soft-hearted. Looking at the drops of golden blood floating towards them, Zhou Ran and Wang Taixing were bewildered, because they had never seen it before. But soon, Zhou Ran revealed a happy expression because he vaguely sensed that the changes in Xiang Yin and her sister's divine nature were definitely related to the golden blood in front of him. So he didn't hesitate and cupped his fists with a happy expression. "Many thanks, High Lord." He didn't think that refining this treasure would be so risky. Wang Taixing had thought about it even more. But how could he refuse in the current situation? Since he had come to seek refuge, he naturally had to show his sincerity. He immediately cupped his fists and said, "Yes." The 2 of them each obtained a drop of golden blood and rushed out of their cave dwellings to refine it. Soon, intense magic power fluctuations came from nearby, and Zhou Ran and Wang Taixing's pitiful cries could be heard. "High Lord, you can't be so biased." Xiang Yin looked at Lu Yi with a pitiful expression. Lu Yi had never seen such a person before. Logically speaking, Xiang Yin had experienced the dangers of refining golden blood, and should be well aware of the dangers involved. She had been lucky enough to succeed once and should have avoided it. But now she actually took the initiative to ask for it. As she spoke, she came over and grabbed Lu Ye's arm and began to shake it. "High Lord, give us sisters some too." Lu Yi had warned her before not to play tricks in front of him, and she had agreed in horror. But that was then and this was now. At that time, she hadn't refined the golden blood, and wasn't considered one of Lu Ye's people. She was only afraid of his abuse of power. But now things were different. After refining Lu Ye's golden blood, she was his woman in the truest sense of the word. So what if she acted coquettishly? She believed that Lu Yi wouldn't vent his anger on her because of this. "No, you've just refined it. It's too risky to refine it again." Lu Yi remained unmoved. Every time a blood race member refined a sacred blood, they would walk the line between life and death. It wasn't easy for him to find useful subordinates. So how could he be willing to let these sisters take another risk? Xiang Yin hugged Lu Ye's arm tightly and shook it with all her might. Her fierce elasticity caused Lu Ye's heart to skip a beat. She said in a coquettish voice, "But High Lord, we sisters were the first to submit to you, so we've only shared a single drop. If the 2 of them get a drop each, their holiness will be stronger than ours. This isn't fair." "There's no fairness in this matter." Lu Ye's expression was cold. Xiang Yin lowered her body and knelt in front of Lu Yi. She looked up at him with a pious expression, as if she was looking at her own sky. "High Lord, please give us sisters a drop each. As long as we each have a drop, we'll do anything you want." As she spoke, her coquettish eyes were like silk. Lu Yi didn't have a temper. He looked up at Xianyu and said, "Manage your sister well." Xianyu stammered and lowered her head. "High Lord, I feel refining a sacred blood isn't as dangerous as you say. Although the process is difficult, refining another drop shouldn't be a problem." Lu Yi stared at Xianyu dumbstruck. He never would have thought that the elder sister would stand on the same side as the younger sister on this matter. After pondering for a moment, Lu Yi said, "If you want sacred blood, sure." Xiang Yin's eyes lit up. However, Lu Yi changed the topic. "If Zhou Ran and Wang Taixing succeed in refining the sacred blood in return, I'll give each of you a drop of sacred blood. But if either of them fails, don't mention this matter again." Xiang Yin jumped up in joy. "High Lord, you said it yourself." She quickly stood up from the ground and called out to her sister, "Let's go and cheer them up." Xianyu stepped forward and followed. Lu Yi coldly watched from the sidelines. In his opinion, Zhou Ran's success rate in refining sacred blood was still somewhat high. After all, he was still in the prime of his life. However, he didn't know how high the success rate would be. Perhaps he would fail and die. However, Wang Taixing's success rate was obviously not high. Between the two of them, the best result was that one of them succeeded. The worst result was that both of them failed. As for both of them succeeding, Lu Yi felt it was unrealistic. But in this kind of environment, if he wanted to gather loyal subordinates, letting them refine his sacred blood was the only way. Time flew by. After half a day, Lu Yi looked up in astonishment. Although his vision was blocked, his divine sense wasn't affected. He sensed Wang Taixing's aura. Wang Taixing had actually succeeded in refining his sacred blood. This surprised Lu Yi, because it was a little different from what he had expected. What shocked him even more was that not long after Wang Taixing succeeded in refining his sacred blood, Zhou Ran also succeeded. Things didn't seem quite right. His sacred blood wasn't much different from the sacred blood circulating within the blood tribe. Of course, this no difference referred to the strength of the sacred nature obtained after refining it. This had already been verified by Ma Shangxi. After refining a drop of his sacred blood, Ma Shangxi's sacred nature was equivalent to a drop of sacred blood refined by other blood tribe members. However, if refining sacred blood was so simple, then countless blood tribe members wouldn't have died during the refinement process in the blood refinement realm. Xiang Yin and her sister's previous success could be explained by the fact that the two sisters had shared a drop of precious blood, which reduced the risk. However, Zhou Ran and Wang Taixing's current situation was clearly different from what Lu Yi had expected. End of chapter. Chapter 1792. Including Ma Shangxi, none of the people Lu Yi had bestowed with precious blood had failed. This was undoubtedly abnormal. Even though Ma Shangxi, Xiang Yin, and the others were all at the late-stage Yu Yao realm, the perils of refining holy blood shouldn't have much to do with one's cultivation. Instead, refining holy blood was a process of developing and refining one's blood tribe bloodline. Lu Yi faintly had an idea in his heart. His precious blood might be somewhat different from the real blood race's saint blood, and this difference should be able to greatly reduce the risk of refining it. The reason for this conjecture was naturally because of his talent tree. During the process of refining the blood race holy blood, his talent tree had burned away everything that was detrimental to him, leaving behind only those that weren't a threat to him. As such, the precious blood he refined was naturally different from the holy blood. Although both could stimulate one's blood race bloodline, his precious blood was undoubtedly much weaker in terms of lethality. If true holy blood was extremely poisonous, then his precious blood wasn't as poisonous. Thus, the risk of refining it wasn't as great for the blood servants. Of course, this was only his conjecture. Whether or not this was the case had yet to be verified. It was also possible that Xiang Yin and the other first-generation blood race members were different from ordinary blood race members. Because of their status as first-generation blood race members, they could withstand greater risks during the refining process. But no matter which possibility it was a good thing for Lu Yi. After a short while, Xiang Yin, and the others returned together. Zhou Ran and Wang Taixing looked at Lu Yi with different eyes. Before, they had only submitted because of Lu Ye's holy aura. But now, they had truly submitted. Great Lord! Xiang Yin looked at Lu Yi expectantly, almost reminding him not to go back on his word. Lu Yi ignored her, and looked at Xianyu instead. Can I really refine another drop? Xianyu replied cautiously. We sisters are willing to do our best to live up to Great Lord's expectations. Lu Yi pondered for a moment, then flicked his finger, and bestowed his last 2 drops of precious blood. He also wanted to know if his conjecture was correct. The Snow Race sisters each received a drop of precious blood, and happily ran out to refine it. Lu Yi sat cross-legged and spread out his divine sense to investigate, the 2 sisters' miserable cries resounding in his ears one after another. Even though the process was arduous, the results were good. Half a day later, the Xiang Yin sisters successfully refined the precious blood. Apart from being in a sorry state, there weren't any other problems. At this point, Lu Yi was finally sure of one thing. His precious blood was not the same as the blood race's sacred blood. Its lethality was much lower than that of the sacred blood. This was undoubtedly good news, because in this way, he could gather more people with peace of mind. Although there weren't many cultivators scattered in this world, it was still a good thing to have one more. Moreover, every single one of them that came to his side would be able to rapidly improve their own holiness. In the future, they would undoubtedly be of great use in resisting the Saint Blood Peak. After 2 days of rest, Xiang Yin and the other 3 were sent out by Lu Yi. Their task was to search for scattered cultivators and bring them back. Lu Yi himself remained at Black Prison Cliff to refine his precious blood. He originally had 5 drops of precious blood, but they had all been used up in the past few days, so he could only refine them again. Refining precious blood was not an easy task. Even though his cultivation had increased, it still took him more than half a month to refine a single drop. Moreover, each drop of precious blood consumed a great deal of his foundation and required a large amount of resources to replenish it. While he was refining, Lu Yi suddenly opened his eyes. In the next moment, he stood up and the void spirit runes under his feet quickly formed. With a flash of light, his figure disappeared. 100 kilometers away from Snow Listening Peak, a figure was quietly lying dormant, looking at the flattened Snow Listening Peak with a puzzled expression. Some time ago, the Saint Blood Peak received news that a newcomer had arrived in this world. This newcomer's holiness was unprecedented and extremely terrifying. It just so happened that 2 Snow Race members of Snow Listening Peak wanted to join the Saint Blood Peak, so they leaked this newcomer's whereabouts to the Saint Blood Peak. The Saint Blood Peak naturally did not dare to be negligent. Immediately, a late-stage Moonjade cultivator was ordered by Blazing Heaven to bring the red talisman to kill this newcomer. At that time, if not for the fact that Blazing Heaven had other important matters to attend to, he would have personally come to meet this newcomer. However, that late-stage Moonjade cultivator quickly lost contact with the Saint Blood Peak, so it was basically certain that she was dead. This made the Saint Blood Peak very uneasy, so they naturally sent someone to investigate the situation. This ghost cultivator was sent because of this matter, but after investigating, he was very confused. He had no idea what had happened to his late-stage Moonjade cultivator. The red talisman must have been activated. Otherwise, Snow Listening Peak would not have disappeared for no reason. Moreover, the location where Snow Listening Peak disappeared did indeed have remnants of the red talisman's aura. Logically speaking, no cultivator should be able to resist the red talisman's power, let alone a mid-stage Moonjade cultivator. Then what was the matter with his companion's disappearance? He thought of the Snow Race member, who had tipped off the Saint Blood Peak. If he wanted to find out what had happened, he would have to find that Snow Race member and ask him personally. After making up his mind, the ghost cultivator prepared to leave this place first. However, as he turned around, he suddenly froze on the spot, as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. In the sky not far away, a figure stood in midair, looking indifferently in his direction. The ghost cultivator was shocked. He had not even noticed the other party's movements before. There was only one possibility in this situation. and that was that the other party was even better than him in terms of stealth. Upon closer inspection, the figure was in his 20s. He had a long saber at his waist, and was dressed in a tight black and white robe. His cultivation was at the mid-stage Moonjade cultivator. The ghost cultivator immediately knew the identity of this person. It was obviously the newcomer that the snow race had mentioned. While the ghost cultivator's thoughts were changing, Lu Yi just quietly stared in the direction where he was hibernating. This ghost cultivator was quite accomplished in terms of stealth. Even if Lu Yi activated the insight spirit tattoo, he could only see some blurry traces, and could not see through his true body. When he left Snow Listening Peak with the Xiang sisters for Black Prison Cliff, Lu Yi knew that the Saint Blood Peak would definitely send someone to investigate the situation here. Therefore, he left a talent tree clone here to monitor the surroundings. This ghost cultivator had arrived silently, if it were not for the fact that he had leaked a trace of spiritual power when he was investigating the Snow Listening Peak. The talent tree clone might not have been able to detect him. As he observed, he found that the ghost cultivator did not move at all. He seemed to naively think that it was just a coincidence that Lu Yi was looking in this direction, and did not find any trace of him. Lu Yi stepped forward. The blood mist around him swept forward with a loud rumble. In an instant, a sea of blood stretched across, enveloping the surrounding space. Almost at the same time that Lu Yi moved, the ghost cultivator was ready to use an escape technique to leave this place. However, the suppression of the terrifying saint nature caused his spiritual power to suddenly stagnate. When he came back to his senses, he was already enveloped by the sea of blood. "Ah!" he screamed, his eyes filled with fear, and his eyes trembled violently. Although he had long heard from the snow race of the Snow Listening Peak that the newcomer's saint nature was abnormally strong, that was only hearsay after all. Now that he had personally experienced it, he realized that the intensity of the saint nature was far beyond his understanding. Under the suppression of the other party's saint nature, he felt like a rabbit that had encountered a tiger. He could only tremble. His hands and feet were a little weak, and he could not summon the courage to resist at all. In the thick sea of blood, a figure slowly approached him. The ghost cultivator bit the tip of his tongue. Only then did he summon up all his strength. The short blade in his hand fiercely stabbed forward. Under the release of his spiritual power, the sea of blood was split open. However, this desperate attack did not have any effect. Lu Yi's long saber slashed down. Not only did it block his short blade, but it even cut off his arms. The ghost cultivator staggered back, enduring the pain. His forehead was sweating. Looking at the figure that was slowly approaching him, he knew that he was probably doomed this time. After a short while, the sea of blood dissipated. Lu Yi carried the ghost cultivator, who had completely lost the ability to resist, and flew toward Black Prison Cliff. Half a month passed in the blink of an eye. In the cave, Lu Yi opened his eyes. After half a month of hard work, he had finally condensed a drop of precious blood. It was really not easy. He directly got up and walked to the side. Soon he came to a room. In this room, two figures were sitting upright. One was the ghost cultivator that he had captured alive before. The other's severed arms had been reattached. Lu Yi had no intention of imprisoning him. Only the talent tree clone was guarding here. The ghost cultivator probably knew that he could not escape, so he had been very quiet during this period. However, he could not figure out what Lu Yi was trying to do. In the end, he still felt uneasy. He had asked the talent tree clone many times, but the clone did not give him any response at all. Seeing Lu Yi's original body walk in, the ghost cultivator looked at the clone, and then looked at the original body. Only then did he ask, "What do you want to do?" Killing but not killing, releasing but not letting go, was really torturous. "I'll give you an opportunity. Do you want it?" Lu Yi looked at him and asked. The ghost cultivator frowned. "What do you mean?" Lu Yi flicked his finger, and the fresh precious blood flew toward the ghost cultivator. "Refine it and you'll know." The ghost cultivator suspiciously looked at the precious blood floating in front of him. He instinctively felt that this thing was not something good. However, the powerful saint nature contained in this drop of precious blood made him very tempted. "What is this?" the ghost cultivator asked. "Refine it. You have no other choice." Lu Yi's voice was as calm as water. Hearing this, the ghost cultivator was immediately discouraged. Now that he was on the chopping block, he really had no other choice. He faintly guessed that this was probably a method used by the other party to control him, so refining it should not be too risky. If the other party really wanted to kill him, he would not have brought him back. He looked deeply at Lu Yi, gritted his teeth, and grabbed the precious blood in his hand. In the next moment, he felt that this drop of precious blood seemed to have become a living thing and seeped into his flesh and blood. A miserable scream rang out. Lu Yi retreated to the side and waited quietly. After more than half a day, when the golden light dissipated, the ghost cultivator was lying on the ground covered in sweat. His body twitched slightly. He looked miserable, but he was still alive. Lu Yi was more and more certain that his previous guess about the precious blood was correct. Otherwise, there was no way to explain why the blood tribe members who refined his precious blood were all alive. End of chapter. Chapter 1793. A moment later, the ghost cultivator knelt on one knee in front of Lu Yi with a respectful expression. After refining his precious blood, the ghost cultivator had a natural sense of awe towards Lu Yi. "What's your name?" Lu Yi asked. "Zhou Tianbao," the ghost cultivator replied. "How long have you been in this world?" After asking a few simple questions and learning a little bit about his new blood warrior, Lu Yi suddenly changed the subject. "Zhou Tianbao, I have something I need you to do. Does Sir want me to return to St. Blood Mountain?" Zhou Tianbao looked up at Lu Yi. Lu Yi nodded slightly. "You are a smart person." The reason why Lu Yi had spared Zhou Tianbao's life and allowed him to refine his precious blood was because of this. After waiting for half a month, Zhou Tianbao had also considered this possibility. If Lu Yi had known that the risk of refining his precious blood wasn't so great, he wouldn't have killed the late-stage Moon Jade, who used the red talisman. Instead, he could have directly subdued her. Of course, it wasn't too late to make these arrangements now, but there were still some problems that needed to be solved. "You've been delayed for so long without any news. If Blazing Heaven asks, how will you explain this?" Lu Yi asked. Zhou Tianbao replied, "Sir, you don't need to worry about this. When I go out to carry out a mission, sometimes I need to hide for a long time. It's common for me to not respond to any news." Lu Yi nodded, then asked, "How will you explain the death of the Red Talisman Association's traitor?" Zhou Tianbao thought for a moment, then said, "The Snow Clan sisters have long since submitted to the Red Talisman Association. The previous matter was completely a trap set by the Red Talisman Association." Lu Yi frowned. The Red Talisman Association doesn't accept cultivators tainted with divine attribute. It doesn't make sense for the Snow Clan sisters to submit to them. Zhou Tianbao said, "The Snow Clan sisters were coerced by the Red Talisman Association, so they spread fake news. They wanted to lure Blazing Heaven out and use the power of the Red Talisman to kill him. Unfortunately, they didn't succeed." This explanation was barely acceptable. For the next half a day, Lu Yi and Zhou Tianbao discussed a few more things. After confirming that there wouldn't be any major problems after returning, Lu Yi let him leave. However, after talking with Zhou Tianbao, Lu Yi understood something else. Back then, St. Blood Peak had sent a late-stage Moon Jade cultivator with a red talisman to deal with him. He had been a bit puzzled, because if he were Blazing Heaven, he would have done it himself. In terms of holiness, Blazing Heaven was undoubtedly the strongest in this world. In terms of cultivation, he was also the strongest. Now that a newcomer who seemed to have a stronger holiness than him had suddenly appeared, he had to investigate this newcomer no matter what. There was no need to use a strategic weapon like the red talisman. However, after Zhou Tianbao's explanation, Lu Yi finally understood the reason. Blazing Heaven seemed to have something important to deal with during this time, so he couldn't get away. Zhou Tianbao guessed that Blazing Heaven was in seclusion to comprehend a secret technique. But no matter what, Blazing Heaven not personally appearing was a good thing for Lu Yi. Although Lu Yi was confident that he could suppress Blazing Heaven's holiness, his opponent was still Sunshine. Lu Yi wasn't sure if he could defeat Blazing Heaven even after suppressing him. After all, Blazing Heaven's might wasn't that easy to predict. He had no choice in his position. The Saint Blood Peak would definitely become his enemy. Since that was the case, planting a spy there would undoubtedly be very helpful. Lu Yi didn't think of directly attacking the Saint Blood Peak. That would be courting death. According to his understanding, the Saint Blood Peak's foundation wasn't weak. It wasn't something he could shake with his current manpower. Fortunately, there was still the Red Talisman Association. There would definitely be a fierce battle between the two in the near future. What Lu Yi needed to do now was to accumulate strength on his side. Only then would he have the qualifications to intervene when the two sides fought. Another half a month passed in the blink of an eye. Xiang Yin's group of 4 returned one after another, each bringing back a few scattered cultivators. There weren't many of them, only 7 or 8 in total. Moreover, their cultivations were uneven. There was Yu Yao, and there was even a star constellation. These cultivators were in the same situation as Xiang Yin's group. The Red Talisman Association lacked resources and didn't want to waste energy on them. The Saint Blood Peak felt that these cultivators would join them sooner or later, so they gave them some breathing space. However, with Lu Ye's arrival, the situation in this realm had changed. Lu Yi wanted to gather useful people, so they couldn't stay out of trouble. Coupled with the fact that Xiang Yin's group had some connections with these people, it was very easy to track them down. They had just been forcibly subdued, so it was difficult to say whether they were loyal or not. Lu Yi didn't care about this. As long as he had enough time and condensed enough precious blood, he would definitely have a loyal group under his command. This kind of loyalty was something the Red Talisman Association and the Saint Blood Peak couldn't hope for. On this day, Xiang Yin, who was cultivating, suddenly opened her eyes. She took out a sound talisman and checked it. She immediately stood up and said, "Big sister, the Lord has summoned us." Since Lu Ye's arrival, they no longer had to worry about not having enough spirit jades to use. Moreover, after refining the treasure blood, their own blood clan bloodline had greatly improved. From the inheritance of their bloodline, they had recently comprehended many blood clan secret techniques. It could be said that although their cultivation did not increase, their strength had increased by a lot. Okay. Xian Yu also stood up and prepared to meet Lu Yi with Xiang Yin. However, they had only taken a few steps when Xiang Yin shouted, "Wait!" While Xian Yu was puzzled, Xiang Yin had already arrived in front of her. She looked her up and down, then raised her hand to unbutton the top button of her clothes. She then used all her strength to push her chest, squeezing it towards the center. "What are you doing?" Xian Yu blushed. Xiang Yin pursed her lips and smiled. To put the Lord in a good mood, Xian Yu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. How could this put the Lord in a good mood? The High Lord was a person who achieved great things. He was very dignified and had a great bearing. When he spoke to his subordinates, he was always serious and respectful. How could such a High Lord be seduced by a woman? If he really was lustful, the 2 sisters would have been his exclusive property long ago. Even so, Xian Yu didn't resist. If this could put the Lord in a good mood, then she would do it without hesitation. After dealing with her big sister, Xiang Yin also tidied herself. After a short while, the 2 sisters arrived at Lu Ye's residence. "My lord." After saluting, Xian Yu carefully raised her eyes and saw the Lord's gaze fall on her neck. Then, he looked down and stared at her seriously. Xian Yu couldn't help but blush, and when she met Lu Ye's gaze, her cheeks turned even redder, and she hurriedly lowered her head. Up above, Lu Yi coughed lightly and said, "Xian Yu, Xiang Yin, listen." Yes. The 2 sisters' expressions became serious. "Take this and set up an ambush near Jinfeng Valley within 2 days. You can choose your men." Yes. The 2 sisters obeyed. Xiang Yin stepped forward and took a jade box from Lu Yi. Lu Yi felt Xiang Yin deliberately scratch the back of his hand with her finger. He really didn't have any temper with this woman. Compared to her big sister, she was like a seductive fairy, teasing him from time to time. Lu Yi couldn't understand how the Snow Clan, who had always been known for their cold temperament, could produce such a character. She was simply the shame of the Snow Clan. Xian Yu asked, "My lord, who are we going to ambush?" "Saint Blood Mountain," Lu Yi replied. The news came from Zhou Tianbao. who said that St. Blood Mountain would soon take action against the Red Talisman Association. Perhaps the Red Talisman Association will appear. Remember, don't get into any conflict with them. If you can help, don't be stingy. As for the things in the jade box, use them as you see fit. Yes, Xianyu respectfully replied. Also, take your own safety as the most important thing. Whether it's this time or the next time, your life is the priority in all missions. It could be said that if this stronghold was discovered and conquered by St. Blood Mountain's people, there would no longer be a place for the Red Talisman Association in this world. This was because their magic power would be exhausted sooner or later. Without resources to replenish it, they would definitely be tainted by St. Blood Mountain's divine nature. At this moment, the main figures of the Red Talisman Association were gathered here to discuss matters. End of chapter. Chapter 1794. In the secret chamber of the stronghold, Hu Dequan's voice sounded slowly. In the past few months, a new force seems to have emerged in this world, and is targeting St. Blood Peak. St. Blood Peak's operations have been foiled several times, and they have suffered great losses. Where did this force come from? Yongling frowned. Hu Dequan was usually in charge of dealing with external affairs. Usually, he would either cultivate or sleep to maintain his battle prowess. This was because he was the strongest person in the Red Talisman Association. He had 2 red talismans in his hand, and it could be said that he was the trump card against the Sacred Blood Mountain. In the past, he had been the one to step forward and restrain Blazing Heaven in the Black Abyss. So when he heard Hu Dequan say that a new force had appeared in this world, Yongling was very confused. For so many years, this world had maintained the situation of 2 major forces fighting against each other. They had long been used to it. How could a third party suddenly appear? Hu Dequan said, "It's from Black Prison Cliff. It seems to be an organization formed by those loose cultivators." An organization formed by loose cultivators. Yongling was even more surprised. They can cause St. Blood Peak to suffer losses. Hu Dequan nodded. So I also don't understand what's going on. It was not that he looked down on those loose cultivators. It was undeniable that there were a few of them with decent strength. If they had not been corroded by the blood rain early on, and been tainted with the divine nature, the Red Talisman Association would definitely think of ways to rope them in. But because they had suffered losses in the past, the Red Talisman Association did not dare to accept those cultivators with the divine nature. They also could not waste their energy to deal with them, so they could only leave them alone. However, Hu Dequan was the first one who didn't believe that these people could make the Sacred Blood Peak suffer losses. Those scattered cultivators generally hadn't been in this world for too long, so in terms of holiness, they were weaker than the cultivators of the Sacred Blood Peak. Once they fought with the Sacred Blood Peak, they would definitely be suppressed in terms of holiness. But this was the information he had gathered. Meng Su nodded. I've heard about this too. It's said that several teams of St. Blood Peak that were carrying out missions outside were completely wiped out. Only a few people managed to escape. Yongling's face was full of surprise. These loose practitioners are really something. He then frowned. But why are they doing this? Logically speaking, the only way out for these independent cultivators was to side with St. Blood Peak, because the Red Talisman Association would absolutely not accept them. Yet now, not only had they not sided with St. Blood Peak, they'd banded together to go against St. Blood Peak instead. Are they tired of living? Hu Dequan pondered and said, I'm guessing that someone might want to replace Blazing Heaven. Yongling was startled. There are actually people with such ambitions among those wandering cultivators? If there were, they would have shown themselves long ago, and would not have taken action only recently. Meng Su suddenly asked, Do you still remember that little brother? A young face immediately appeared in their minds. After all, it was something that happened a few months ago. How could they not remember? The changes in this world seemed to have happened after this person arrived. Could this be his doing? Meng Su guessed. Yongling frowned and said, He is just a middle-stage moon jade. How can he have such ability? There are a few late-stage moon jade cultivators among those wandering cultivators. Even if he has the deterrence of the Red Talisman Association, how can he subdue those wandering cultivators? And even make them risk their lives for him and Saint Blood Peak? But the timing is a little too coincidental. The timing was indeed coincidental. But none of them believed that it was that little brother who had united the rogue cultivators to fight against the Saint Blood Mountain. I'm going to find an opportunity to get in touch with Black Prison Cliff and see what's going on, Hu Dequan said. Although the Red Talisman Association could not accept those cultivators who were tainted by divine nature, they could still cooperate with the enemy of their enemy. Black Prison Cliff and Saint Blood Peak already had irreconcilable conflicts. Even if there were no benefits for the Red Talisman Association to get in touch with them, there would be no harm. That's possible. Mengsu nodded. But we still have to be careful. Maybe this is a trick by Saint Blood Peak. Even if it isn't, they might not be on the same side as us. I'll be careful. Hu Dequan sighed. A new battle for supremacy in Black Abyss is in another half a year. I wonder if we'll be able to hold on this time. In the battle for supremacy in Black Abyss, it had always been Saint Blood Peak that occupied the advantage, and the Red Talisman Association was able to hold on bitterly because of the might of the Red Talisman Association. But after so many years, the Red Talisman Association had been using less and less. Presently, they still had a few red talismans that they could utilize, but once all of them were exhausted, then they wouldn't have the ability to resist any longer. If they wanted to struggle on while at death's door, then they would have to obtain more red talismans from Mount Innerheart. Their expressions were slightly helpless when the battle for supremacy in Black Abyss was mentioned, and they truly didn't know when such days would come to an end. Amidst this silence, a voice suddenly sounded out from above. Because of the thick layer of earth, the voice was slightly illusory and indistinct, but it still entered clearly into their ears. Fellow Taoists, can you show yourself? The expressions of Hu Dequan and the others changed, and they glanced at each other as they realized the severity of the problem. The base of the Red Talisman Association has been exposed. This undoubtedly caused them to be extremely terrified, but fortunately, it wasn't Saint Blood Peak that came to look for them, and it was a slightly familiar voice instead. It was precisely that little brother they'd spoken about earlier. After a short moment of hesitation, the three of them made a decision. Since Saint Blood Peak had already come looking for them, they were definitely unable to avoid him. They had to figure out how this little brother knew the exact location of this base, and they had to figure out the reason he'd come. If it was possible, it was best if they could make him stay here. Otherwise, the location of this base would be exposed to Saint Blood Peak one day. After a short while, energy rose and fell within a concealed cave while the grand formation droned, and then Hu Dequan's figure was revealed. They usually traveled to and from the base via teleportation formations, and there was more than one such formation. Hu Dequan had undoubtedly made an appearance by himself with the intention of making Lu Yi lower his guard. And then the other cultivators of the Red Talisman Association would appear from other formations and completely encircle Lu Yi. There was no problem with the Red Talisman Association's plan, but when Hu Dequan arrived at Lu Ye's location, he couldn't help but be stunned. Because when he looked over, Lu Yi wasn't the only one there. With him in the lead, there were over 10 figures standing behind him. Most of them looked extremely familiar, and even if they hadn't interacted with them, they'd seen them from afar. Obviously, they were those cultivators that were scattered outside. Were these rogue cultivators really united by him? In that case, the actions against the Sacred Blood Mountain in the past few months were also led by Lu Yi? Even though Hu Dequan had thought of this before, he was still shocked when he saw it with his own eyes. He didn't know what kind of means Lu Yi had to be able to gather such a force in such a short time. Moreover, looking at the attitude of those rogue cultivators, they seemed to be quite respectful to him. This was going to be troublesome. They'd originally thought that Lu Yi had come alone and wanted to keep him here, but now there were more than 10 people on the other side, and there were as many as 4 of them in the late stage of the Moon Jade Realm. How could the Red Talisman Association keep him here? It wasn't that they couldn't keep him here, but if they forcefully made a move, both sides would only suffer. It could even be said that if they made a big commotion and were discovered by the cultivators of the Sacred Blood Mountain, the consequences would be even more severe. Thinking of this, Hu Dequan hurriedly urged the Sound Talisman and sent a message out, telling Yang Ling and Meng Su, who were approaching from other routes, to stay calm. He didn't see any hostility from Lu Yi, so he wanted to figure out the other party's intentions first. "Brother, we meet again." Lu Yi looked at Hu Dequan. Hu Dequan's expression was complicated, and he sighed slightly. "Brother, what are you up to?" He'd suddenly brought a group of people here, and directly found the most hidden base of the Red Talisman Association. No matter how one looked at it, they didn't seem to have good intentions, but they didn't seem to have any hostility. This made Hu Dequan very confused. "I'm just here to give you a heads up." Lu Yi looked at him with a sincere expression. "Your base has been exposed, and the cultivators of the Sacred Blood Mountain are on their way to encircle and annihilate you. So you'd better pack up and leave." It had to be said that the Red Talisman Association's base was hidden very well. It hadn't been discovered for so many years, and it provided the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association with the strength to persist. However, the Sacred Blood Mountain wasn't to be trifled with. Blazing Heaven had always wanted to find this base, and he'd spent a lot of effort and manpower to do so. A few days ago, he'd finally made a discovery. Lu Yi knew about this because of the spies he'd planted in the Sacred Blood Mountain. Otherwise, with his background in this world, it would be impossible for him to find this place. Hearing this, Hu Dequan's expression changed drastically. "Where did you get this information from?" Lu Yi looked at him and didn't explain. "I was able to find this place." Does fellow Taoist still not understand? Hu Dequan's expression was uncertain. He instinctively felt that Lu Yi had informed the Sacred Blood Mountain. But after thinking about it carefully, he didn't think that was possible. The two sides had been fighting fiercely in the past few months, and the Sacred Blood Mountain had suffered a few losses. It was impossible for Lu Yi to do such a thing. Moreover, Lu Yi wouldn't have informed the Sacred Blood Mountain, and then come to remind them. "Fellow Taoist, I understand the rules of recruiting people, but sometimes it's not a good thing to stick to the rules. In the face of a common enemy, only by working together can we find a way out. That's all I have to say. Farewell." Saying so, Lu Yi turned around and was about to leave. Hu Dequan's expression changed. On one hand, he was shocked by the information he'd received, but on the other hand, he was conflicted by Lu Ye's words. Suddenly, he raised his hand and said, "Wait." Lu Yi stopped and turned to look at him. Hu Dequan said, "How about we exchange notes?" He had planned to go to Black Prison Cliff to get in touch with these loose cultivators, and now that they'd taken the initiative to come to him, he naturally went with the flow. "Okay." Lu Yi flicked his finger, sending a note flying out. After a short while they exchanged notes. Only then did Lu Yi lead his subordinates into a sea of blood and rush into the distance. They could no longer stay at Black Prison Cliff. While the Sacred Blood Mountain was making a move here, they had also sent many cultivators to Black Prison Cliff. The Sacred Blood Mountain had been deeply involved in this world for many years, so they were quite well informed. In the past few months, the Sacred Blood Mountain had made several heavy moves against the Sacred Blood Mountain, so it was impossible for them to be unaware of the source of the problem. The Blood Moon was approaching, and the first-generation vampire's strength would increase significantly. The Sacred Blood Mountain clearly wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to attack the Red Talisman Association's stronghold and kick away the Black Prison Cliff, eliminating these two hidden dangers in one fell swoop. End of chapter. Chapter 1795. After Lu Yi learned that Sacred Blood Peak had dispatched troops to Black Prison Cliff, he immediately left with Xiang Yin and the others. It wasn't that he was afraid. According to the information he received, Sacred Blood Peak had dispatched over 20 Yuyao cultivators to deal with Black Prison Cliff. Their numbers were much greater than his side, but if they really fought, Sacred Blood Peak's side would be the ones to suffer. After all, the suppression of Sacred Blood Peak's holy nature was something these first-generation blood race cultivators couldn't ignore. Not to mention himself, even Xiang Yin and the others had far more Sacred Blood Peak's holy nature than their enemies. Even so, Lu Yi wasn't confident he could exterminate these invaders. After all, they were all Yu Yao cultivators, so who knew what kind of mysterious methods they had? Once his own information was exposed, it would definitely attract Blazing Heaven's attention, which would be detrimental to his next plan. If things went wrong, Blazing Heaven might personally take action. He planned to keep his Sacred Blood Peak's holy nature a secret before fighting Blazing Heaven. Only then would he be able to catch Blazing Heaven off guard. Although Sacred Blood Peak knew that his Sacred Blood Peak's holy nature was very strong, due to Xiang Yin's tip-off, they didn't know how strong it was because they hadn't truly felt it and couldn't imagine it. Lu Yi didn't want to fight Blazing Heaven at this time, because even if he defeated him with his Sacred Blood Peak, he wouldn't be able to exterminate him. The battle for Black Abyss half a year later was a very good choice. Black Abyss was the battlefield he had chosen. Due to these considerations, Lu Yi decided to abandon Black Prison Cliff and bring his subordinates away. He also wanted to sell a favor to the Red Talisman Society and let them know that he was someone they could cooperate with. Rizhao was undoubtedly very strong, but before they fought, Lu Yi didn't know if he was Blazing Heaven's match. If he could cooperate with the Red Talisman Society, it would undoubtedly increase his chances of winning. The sea of blood surged forward, enveloping all the cultivators on his side. Lu Yi quickly received a message from Hu Dequan. There was nothing else in the message other than a place to hide. The Red Talisman Society had been fighting a battle of wits and courage with Sacred Blood Peak for many years. Even though their strength was far inferior, they had never been exterminated because they relied on their ability to hide. It could be said that the Red Talisman Association possessed countless concealed strongholds in this world, and Hu Dequan had revealed one of them to Lu Yi. On one hand, it was to repay Lu Ye's kindness and to thank Lu Yi for the information he provided earlier, and on the other hand, he was probably probing Lu Yi. Lu Yi kept saying that he was someone he could cooperate with. Since that was the case, then he should give him a place to hide. If he dared to go, then there was no doubt that he was sincere in cooperating. If he didn't dare to go, then he must be hiding something. There was nothing Lu Yi didn't dare to do. He was worried about where to hide, so he immediately sent a message of thanks and led his men to the location of the stronghold. The haze in the sky gradually thinned, and the blood moon showed signs of appearing. At the same time, the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association were retreating hastily. Even though they didn't know if the information provided by Lu Yi was reliable, they would rather believe it than not. Especially when Lu Yi had already found the base. Of course, after retreating, Hu Dequan and the others still hid in the distance to investigate the situation. 2 days later, a large number of cultivators from the St. Blood Mountain found this place and began to bombard it without any explanation. Hu Dequan and the others' eyelids twitched as they secretly rejoiced at Lu Ye's warning. Otherwise, even if the Red Talisman Association wasn't destroyed this time, it would suffer heavy losses. When the Battle of Black Abyss began half a year later, they would no longer have the ability to resist. At this time, Lu Yi was in a mountain valley, looking up at the blood moon and prying into its mysteries. Since coming to the inner world, Lu Yi had been condensing his own blood except when the blood moon was in the sky. So far, this was already the third time the blood moon had appeared in the sky. The progress of the Blood Eye Spirit rune was pretty good, and Lu Yi estimated that he should be able to complete it after 2 more times. According to the pattern of the blood moon's appearance, he would definitely have 2 chances in half a year. Of course, he couldn't rule out the possibility of an accident, but Lu Yi couldn't do anything about it. He couldn't control the timing of the blood moon's appearance, so he could only wait. For the next period of time, the Red Talisman Association would be completely dormant. With their base destroyed, they would lose the spirit plants they had painstakingly cultivated. From now on, they would no longer have any resources they could use. Although Lu Yi had given them a batch of spirit plants before, they wouldn't be able to last for long. Therefore, the Red Talisman Association felt very anxious and decided to fight the St. Blood Mountain in the next Battle of Black Abyss. If they missed this opportunity, the Red Talisman Association's situation would become more and more difficult in the future. Because of this, the Red Talisman Association began to take the initiative to contact Lu Yi more frequently, because from the past, they could determine Lu Ye's position against the Saint Blood Mountain. Coupled with the fact that time waited for no man, they had no other choice but to join forces with Lu Yi. This was undoubtedly Lu Ye's wish. After coming to this world, he initially wanted to integrate into the Red Talisman Association and fight the Saint Blood Mountain together with them. But because of some twists and turns, he didn't get to do so. He understood the choice of Hu Duquan and the others at that time, and didn't feel resentful, because he couldn't explain the secret of the talent tree to others. Although the process was a little complicated, the result could be considered to be satisfactory. Looking at it this way, his method of gathering the rogue cultivators was correct, because without this force, the Red Talisman Association might not have paid attention to him. The greatest harvest Lu Yi obtained from the Red Talisman Association was all kinds of information about the Battle of Black Abyss. The more he learned about this matter, the more certain he was that choosing to fight Blazing Heaven in the Black Abyss was a wise decision. In the secret area of the stronghold, Lu Yi was condensing his own treasure blood when a sound talisman suddenly vibrated. He took it out to investigate, thinking that it was Hu Duquan who had contacted him. Recently, their relationship could be said to be growing day by day. After discarding the inherent concept of rejection, Hu Duquan found that Lu Yi was worthy of a deep friendship, so he would often send him a message to discuss some matters. Currently, the relationship between the two parties was very close. They were just short of staying together. However, there would still be occasional interactions between the two parties. They got along very well. But after investigating the sound talisman, Lu Yi discovered that the one who contacted him was not Hu Duquan, but ghost cultivator Zhou Tianbao. Sir, I've been exposed. This subordinate will fight to the death. In addition, please be careful. Blazing Heaven has been in seclusion cultivating a secret technique, and seems to have reached the minor accomplishment stage. After checking the information in the sound talisman, Lu Yi lowered his eyes slightly. He had expected that Zhou Tianbao would be exposed. Ever since he gathered many rogue cultivators, he began to target Sacred Blood Peak, and destroyed several squads that went out to carry out missions. Before this, Sacred Blood Peak's encirclement of the Red Talisman Association and Black Prison Cliff had failed. As long as the cultivators of Sacred Blood Peak weren't fools, they would definitely be able to guess that there was a problem within their stronghold. Otherwise, the enemy wouldn't have moved in advance. After realizing that there was a problem within their stronghold, Sacred Blood Peak would inevitably investigate. Once such a situation occurred, Zhou Tianbao would be exposed sooner or later. This was because during this period of time, all the information about Sacred Blood Peak had been leaked by him. If Sacred Blood Peak followed the clues, there was no way Zhou Tianbao would be able to escape. Lu Yi had previously asked him to inquire about Blazing Heaven's situation, because there was something he was very concerned about. Recently, Blazing Heaven had been doing something and hadn't shown himself. Even when the Red Talisman Association's stronghold was targeted, Blazing Heaven still hadn't appeared. Zhou Tianbao had clearly discovered something. It could even be said that Blazing Heaven's secret technique had reached the minor accomplishment stage that allowed him to discover Zhou Tianbao's betrayal. Secret technique. Lu Yi immediately thought of the Blood Eye Spirit Rune. When the Blood Moon was in the sky, the Spirit Rune hidden within the Blood Moon wasn't a secret. If he could pry into it, other cultivators would naturally be able to pry into it as well. The cultivators of the Red Talisman Association had once studied the Blood Moon, and faintly felt that the Spirit Rune hidden within the strange Blood Moon was related to a secret technique. However, they couldn't find a way to enter it, and could only helplessly give up. As for observing the Spirit Rune itself, the Blood Eye Spirit Rune was simply too complicated. No matter how outstanding a Spirit Rune master was, it was impossible to completely construct this Spirit Rune. If it weren't for Lu Ye's talent tree, he wouldn't have wasted this time. The Battle of the Black Abyss in the New World was about to begin, and Blazing Heaven's secret technique had reached the minor accomplishment stage. This wasn't good news. When Lu Yi tried to contact Zhou Tianbao again, the sound talisman couldn't be transmitted. This undoubtedly meant that Zhou Tianbao was dead. Moreover, through the perception of his own sacred blood, Lu Yi couldn't detect any traces of Zhou Tianbao, the blood warrior. It was a pity. Lu Yi had also thought about whether or not he should let Zhou Tianbao leave Sacred Blood Peak in advance. But in the end, he didn't do so. This was because Zhou Tianbao wasn't the only spy he had planted in Sacred Blood Peak. Every time Xiang Yin and the others went out to carry out a mission, he would give them a jade box, so they could use it at their discretion. Sealed in that jade box was none other than the blood treasure he had painstakingly condensed. Zhou Tianbao had to die. Only with his death could Sacred Blood Peak relax their vigilance and protect the other spies. After pondering for a moment, Lu Yi sent a message to Hu Duquan, informing him that Blazing Heaven had come out of seclusion. The Red Talisman Association and its people needed to lay low even more thoroughly. After Blazing Heaven came out of seclusion, he would definitely make a move. Once he found any clues, there would inevitably be many casualties. All of this was to accumulate strength for the final battle of the Black Abyss. Lu Yi had distributed a large number of resources, just so that the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association could maintain their strongest strength at all times. Half a year passed by in a flash. In a secret room of the stronghold, Lu Yi sat cross-legged with his eyes closed. His divine sense constantly surged like a tide. Under his inner vision, the leaves of the talent tree were burning fiercely. Some of the leaves that were originally blank were now densely packed with yin and yang elements that were intertwined with each other. As his spiritual sense surged, even more yin and yang elements began to spread out in all directions. Lu Yi was currently inscribing Blood Eye Spirit runes on the talent tree. After observing the blood moon for the third time half a year ago, he had waited for another 2 months before the blood moon appeared again. Lu Yi still hadn't been able to observe it completely. After waiting for several more months, it wasn't until a few days ago that he was able to observe the blood moon for the last time. End of chapter. Chapter 1796. Many yin and yang elements were intertwined with each other, covering the leaves. Lu Yi's mind was immersed in it, meticulous. This was the most complex spirit pattern Lu Yi had come into contact with so far. Compared to it, it wasn't even worthy of carrying his shoes. He had to ensure that the construction process went smoothly without the slightest mistake. Otherwise, all his previous efforts would be wasted. The magical characteristics of the talent tree itself gave him the possibility of completing this task. If he were to construct this spirit pattern on a jade board, Lu Yi estimated that he would have failed long ago. After a few days, when the last element was successfully constructed, the Blood Eye Spirit pattern was truly completed. Looking inside, an obvious eye pattern appeared on the dense leaves of the talent tree. This pattern was pieced together by leaves and occupied a large area. Looking from a distance, it was as if the talent tree had grown an eye. The lines inside the eye crisscrossed, and if one looked carefully, they would find an inverted triangle pattern in the pupil, which looked extremely strange. Lu Yi was very curious about the use of the spirit pattern. When the demonic eye blinked, if a cultivator was in the outside world, their spirit sea would be eroded by this demonic eye and suspended in the air. This demonic eye had an illusory effect on cultivators, and under the influence of this demonic eye, a cultivator's state of mind would be greatly shaken and become easily irritable. In serious cases, they might even lose control of themselves. But if a cultivator was in the inner world, their strength would obviously increase when the blood moon hung in the sky. But according to Lu Yi's speculation, this was the work of the blood ancestors Saint Blood. In other words, whether it was the demonic eye imprinted in a cultivator's spirit sea, or the blood moon suspended in this world, they were all manifestations of the blood ancestors Saint Blood in different environments. Even if he saw the Blood Eye Spirit pattern, its power should not be comparable to the demonic eye spirit pattern. It might even have a completely different effect, because he was not the blood ancestor. He had to find someone to test it out. Thinking of this, Lu Yi sent out a message and called the Xiang sisters. More than 10 days passed in a flash. On this day, Lu Yi was meditating when a note vibrated. He picked it up and found that it was a message from Hu Dequan. The time had come. The struggle of the Black Abyss was about to begin. Unknowingly, it had already been a year since he arrived in this world. According to the information he currently possessed, if he wanted to completely defeat the Saint Blood Mountain, he could only do so in the battlefield of the Black Abyss. If he failed this time, then he could only wait for another 10 years. 10 years might not be a long time for other Yu Yao, but it was a long time for Lu Yi. Lu Yi pondered for a moment before saying, "There are two types of blood tribe cultivators. The first type is ordinary blood tribe cultivators, and the second type is blood tribe cultivators, who have obtained holy blood and possess holy nature. The latter can condense precious blood, which has countless uses. They can be bestowed upon other blood tribe cultivators and taken in as blood servants. The blood servants will naturally be loyal to their blood master." Meng Su frowned. "So Xiang Yin and the others are your blood servants. But fellow Taoist, you've only been in this world for a short time. In terms of holy nature, shouldn't they be more powerful than you?" "I already possess holy nature before coming to this world. Xiang Yin and the others are inferior to me." Meng Su was confused. "Then are you a human or a blood tribe cultivator?" "I am a human, and the holy nature of the blood tribe is only one of my powers. It won't affect me in the slightest." Meng Su didn't say anything. It wasn't clear whether he believed Lu Yi, but he understood the doubts in his heart. Xiang Yin and the others were actually blood servants. Hu Dequan said, "All right, now that things have come to this, there's no turning back." He gazed deeply at Lu Yi. "Brother, I hope you won't disappoint us." "I won't." Hu Dequan turned his head and looked around. Then he shouted in a low voice, "Let's begin." As soon as he finished speaking, the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association, who were hiding in the surroundings, walked out one by one. There weren't many of them, only about 30 of them. Including Lu Yi and the others, there were only about 40 of them. This was the team that the Red Talisman Association had painstakingly accumulated over the countless years. They were also the only people they could use. The cultivators of both sides gathered in one place. Hu Dequan raised his hand, and a red light bloomed on his fingertip. A violent and ferocious aura spread out. Not only him, but Yang Ling and Zhang Su also did the same. The three of them activated the power of the Red Talisman together, causing the void to tremble. Lu Yi quietly watched from the side. He had obtained a lot of information about the Battle of the Black Abyss from the Red Talisman Association. Of course, he knew that Hu Dequan and the others weren't really activating the Red Talisman. Instead, they were using the power of the Red Talisman as a guide. If Lu Yi wasn't wrong, the target of the guidance should be the consciousness of the inner world. As expected, as the power of the Red Talisman continued to spread out, a small black dot suddenly appeared in the middle of the three. When it first appeared, it was almost imperceptible. But in an instant, the small black dot expanded in all directions with a loud bang. None of them made any movements to dodge. In an instant, the vision of many cultivators darkened, and they felt as if their bodies were weightless. When they came back to their senses, they were no longer where they were originally. Lu Yi looked around and felt a strange sense of familiarity at a glance. Countless floating meteorites shuttled through the void, and floating continents of various sizes stretched across the void. This environment was surprisingly the same as the one he was in when he participated in the Battle of the Black Abyss on Mount Fangsuan. The so-called Black Abyss was indeed no different from the space he entered back then. Lu Yi didn't know if it was the same Black Abyss. It was most likely not, because the Battle of the Black Abyss happened once every 10 years. Although the cycle of the Black Abyss Battle of the Black Abyss was much longer, if it was really the same Black Abyss, there would definitely be a time when they interacted. If that was really the case, when a large group of unfamiliar Yu Yao suddenly appeared during the Battle of the Black Abyss, the situation would definitely be difficult to deal with. But after so many years, the three Black Abyss Battle of the Black Abyss Battle of the Black Abyss had never encountered such a situation. Lu Yi was more inclined to believe that this was another space, but it was more or less the same as the one he had been to before. The only difference was that there was a bright ray of light coming from not far away. Turning his head, he saw a small sun-like sphere emitting light. Upon closer inspection, he even saw a hazy blood-red color on the surface of the sphere. "Move, everyone move quickly!" Hu Dequan shouted. He took the lead and rushed in the direction of the small sun. The others followed closely behind. Xiang Yin and the others gathered around Lu Yi. They looked at him, waiting for his instructions. "Follow the plan," Lu Yi instructed. Then, he led his people and followed behind the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association. The so-called plan was nothing more than to assist the Red Talisman Association. After a short while, more than 40 people gathered around the small sun. Each of them stood solemnly. Hu Dequan looked in the direction of Lu Yi and the others and said solemnly, "Brother Lu, although I've talked with you through transmission before, I still have to tell you in detail. The so-called Battle of the Black Abyss is a battle to protect the origin. The origin was what the Red Talisman Association called the small sun. The origin was the origin of the inner world. Moreover, the origin did indeed have its own consciousness." Lu Yi had already confirmed this when he chatted with Hu Dequan before. Previously, the consciousness of the inner world would communicate with the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association and give them some guidance and help. But as time passed, this consciousness became quieter and quieter. Many times, the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association couldn't get any response from it. The fundamental reason was the layer of blood red that covered the origin. Lu Yi could clearly sense an extremely terrifying divine nature from that layer of blood red. That blood red color was undoubtedly the power of the blood ancestors' precious blood. The precious blood was eroding the origin, and the origin had always been resisting it. Therefore, it was always in a quiet state. Only during the Battle of the Black Abyss would the origin's consciousness be guided by the might of the Red Talisman Association and bring the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association here. Chapter 1797. In fact, the initial cycle of the Battle of the Black Abyss wasn't once every 10 years, but once every 100 years. However, as time passed, the cycle became shorter and shorter, until it became once every 10 years in recent years. This was the hiding place of the origin consciousness, so the shortening of the cycle of the Battle of the Black Abyss undoubtedly meant that the origin consciousness was in a bad situation. And from the current situation, it seemed that the blood ancestors' treasured blood's corrosion of the origin consciousness was beginning to bear fruit. If this continued, even if the Red Talisman Association cultivators could bitterly hold on, the origin consciousness wouldn't be able to hold on. Once the origin consciousness was completely devoured by the treasured blood, there would be no place for the Red Talisman Association cultivators in this world. We're at a disadvantage against the Sacred Blood Peak, because they outnumber us and have sunshine. But as the defending side, we also have an advantage because we arrived here in advance with the help of the origin consciousness, giving us enough time to make some preparations. Hu Dequan's voice continued to resound. This was also the biggest reason why the Red Talisman Association was able to hold on despite being at a disadvantage in terms of numbers and overall strength. Every time the Battle of the Black Abyss occurred, they would arrive here in advance and make some defensive arrangements. In the end, the origin consciousness was the origin consciousness of the core world, so it could naturally use its authority to make things easier for the cultivators on its side. Therefore, the current situation was that the Red Talisman Association cultivators arrived here first, and after some time, the Sacred Blood Peak cultivators would be able to open a passage to this place. How long this delay would be depended on how long the origin consciousness could hold on, because the Sacred Blood Peak cultivators were opening the passage to this place to break the origin consciousness's seal on this space. Therefore, we need to deploy some defensive measures as much as possible. Once the battle begins, our first task is to protect the origin consciousness, and then kill the enemy. Once the battle begins, the origin consciousness will repel all enemies. As long as we can hold on long enough, the Sacred Blood Peak cultivators will be expelled from this place, and only then will we be able to win. Hu Dequan had previously discussed this matter with Lu Yi, and he had also mentioned that this kind of rejection would weaken with the passage of time. In the beginning, the origin consciousness would only need a day, or even half a day to expel the enemy from this space. But during the last battle of the Black Abyss, it took a full 5 days. This time it would definitely take longer. No matter what, the reason for this was that the quintessence's control over this space was weakening. And this was undoubtedly disadvantageous to the Red Talisman Association that was on the defensive here. After a simple explanation of the true essence of the struggle of Black Abyss, many cultivators quickly took action. They had to make more arrangements before the cultivators of St. Blood Peak arrived. One figure after another shuttled back and forth as a large number of asteroids and floating continents were transported back. Cultivators proficient in formations began to set up formations on these asteroids and floating continents. Lu Yi didn't immediately go to help. Instead, he flew towards the source of light. Back when Lu Yi was in the Magic Eye Spectacle, he had speculated that the inner world had its own consciousness. This was because the inner world had indeed shown a conscious reaction when it was rushing towards him. He had even tried to communicate with it, but unfortunately, he did not receive any response. In the end, he was swallowed by the inner world. After entering this world, Lu Yi had also repeatedly tried to communicate with the world's consciousness, but to no avail. Only today did he realize that the consciousness of the inner world had been hiding in this special space all this time. Naturally, it would not respond to his calls. But if this was the case, then what was the situation when the inner world was rushing towards him? At that time, the inner world had clearly acted on its own and was searching for him. In particular, when he was preparing to escape and sacrificing his precious blood, the inner world's reaction was especially strong. As he pondered, a hair-raising thought suddenly popped up in Lu Ye's mind. What if the consciousness of the inner world wasn't the quintessence at that time? In other words, the inner world's action of swallowing him into the inner world wasn't the result of the quintessence's consciousness, but another consciousness? It had swallowed him in, because it had sensed that he had the bloodline of the blood race. After swallowing him, he could be of help to it. If this was the case, then the truth was somewhat terrifying. The situation the Red Talisman Association was facing was much more serious than he had imagined. Lu Ye's expression changed as he raised his hand to touch the source of light in front of him. Not far away, Hu Dequan coldly observed. Just now, he had seen Lu Yi flying towards the core source, but he didn't stop him. This was because he knew that any cultivator with a holy nature who approached the core source wouldn't have a good end. This had been confirmed in previous battles. Because of the layer of bloody light covering the core source, the holy nature seemed to be particularly strong. Any cultivator with a holy nature would find their strength suppressed the closer they got to the core source. But what shocked Hu Dequan was that Lu Yi didn't show any signs of being suppressed. When he touched the core source, Hu Dequan's eyes widened. What was going on? He couldn't understand, because the scene in front of him had already surpassed his inherent understanding. What he could confirm was that Lu Yi had a holy nature, and a very strong one at that. But it shouldn't be strong enough to not be suppressed by that layer of bloody light. But such a strange thing had happened. He found it strange, because he didn't understand what Lu Yi had said before. Lu Yi had told him that he had a holy nature, and could even use all kinds of vampire secret arts at will. However, the holy nature was only one of his powers. Of course, this power would be suppressed by the bloody light outside the core source. After all, this was the power of the blood ancestor's precious blood, and its holy nature was far beyond Lu Ye's reach. However, not only did Lu Yi possess a holiness, but he was also a weapon cultivator of the human race. Standing there, he was indeed unable to activate his own holiness, and it was difficult for him to use the blood kindred's secret arts. However, his powers were not affected at all. If it were Xiang Yin, she probably wouldn't even be able to get close to the core source. Hu Dequan saw that the situation wasn't right, and was about to step forward to stop it. But in the next moment his eyes widened. Because as Lu Ye's hand came into contact with the origin source, the hazy blood-red light covering the origin source began to undergo some strange changes. Originally, this blood-red light was like a shell that tightly wrapped around the origin source, but now it seemed to be boiling. At this moment, extremely tiny roots that could not be seen extended from Lu Ye's palm. In the blink of an eye, they wrapped around the enormous origin. Lu Ye had activated the power of the talent tree. If the core source was a cultivator, then the hazy bloody light was a foreign object that invaded the cultivator's body. It was like the cursed power in the mermaid clan's bloodline, or the soul-devouring aphids in Yaya's divine sea. Lu Ye activated the power of the talent tree to try and see if he could burn away this layer of bloody light. In just a moment of contact, Lu Ye knew that it could be done, because with the activation of the talent tree's power, the layer of bloody light was obviously showing some abnormal reactions. The bloody light turned into a bloody mist and seemed to be evaporating, and the color of the bloody light was slowly weakening. Hu Dequan finally came to and rushed in front of Lu Ye. He was surprised and doubtful. "Brother Lu, what are you doing?" He wanted to stop him, because no matter what Lu Ye was doing, the core source couldn't be touched casually. If Lu Ye had evil intentions, then this battle would be lost without a fight. But after seeing the changes in the core with his own eyes, he realized that what Lu Ye was doing seemed to be a good thing for the core source. "I'll tell you later," Lu Ye replied, and focused on activating the power of the talent tree. At this moment, he clearly felt that in the process of burning away the bloody light, some mysterious things were refined into his body through the roots of the talent tree. He felt that his own holiness was rapidly increasing. Originally, after coming to this world, he had bestowed a lot of precious blood, which had actually damaged his own holiness. But because his holiness was too strong, this damage was not very obvious. Compared to other blood kindred, he still had enough of an advantage to crush them with his holiness. If he wanted to replenish the lost holiness, then he could only refine more blood kindred's holy blood. He definitely couldn't find any blood kindred's holy blood for the time being. But he didn't want to wait for a huge replenishment here. While thinking, Lu Ye realized that this bloody light was the manifestation of the blood ancestors' holy blood. His original intention was to burn it away, so that it could reduce the pressure on the core's consciousness. Maybe it would be of some help to his side in the upcoming battle. But this burning process was equivalent to using the bloody light as a cultivation resource like spirit jade. In the process of refining the spirit jade, Lu Ye used the roots of the talent tree to probe into the spirit jade. While burning away the impurities, he also refined the energy of the spirit jade for his own use and strengthened his foundation. The current situation was that he had exchanged the spirit jade for this layer of bloody light. In essence, his current state was no different from normal cultivation. It was just that in this kind of cultivation, his cultivation would not increase, but his blood kindred's holiness would rapidly increase. Great nourishment. The holiness he had lost before was quickly replenished, and it was still increasing. Hu Dequan stood to the side and watched, becoming more and more certain that Lu Ye's actions were beneficial to the core. He no longer had any thoughts of stopping him, and let him stay here, while he began to preside over the various matters of constructing the defensive line. Lu Ye originally thought that he could quickly refine the layer of bloody light, but no matter how he refined it, the layer of bloody light showed no signs of weakening. But the growth of his holiness in his body was obvious. This allowed him to slowly understand one thing. The blood ancestors' holy blood was not just on the surface of the core, but also on the inside. This gave him the illusion that he could not completely refine it. If he had enough time, he should be able to return the core to its origin. But there was definitely not enough time, making it somewhat difficult for him to do so. Just as he was feeling helpless, he suddenly felt a force gently touching his divine sea's defenses, as if someone was knocking on his door. Lu Ye was stunned for a moment, but he quickly reacted and opened his divine sea, anxiously immersing himself in his soul avatar. Within the divine sea, Lu Ye looked up and saw that there was an additional figure here at a glance. A white-haired old man with a walking stick in his hand. He was very short, about the height of a 10-year-old child. His long beard hung down to his chest, and his forehead was bulging like a mountain. End of chapter. Chapter 1798. Looking at the figure of the little old man who had suddenly appeared in his divine sea, And thinking back to when his divine sea had been lightly touched, Lu Yi immediately realized the other party's identity. A source consciousness? If he was not mistaken, this little old man in front of him was an existence similar to Xiao Jiao and Huan Yang, a manifestation of a world domain's will. His divine sea's defenses being touched was undoubtedly the work of this old man. The little old man nodded lightly. Yes. He then asked, the Dao Tree bloodline? What? Lu Yi frowned, not understanding. The little old man gave Lu Yi a deep look and did not explain much. But Lu Yi clearly saw a look of dread in the other party's eyes, and he did not know if it was just his imagination. Just as he was about to ask something, the little old man seemed to have discovered a new world and stared at the seven-colored divine lotus at the foot of Lu Yi's soul avatar in surprise. Soul-warming lotus? Taking a closer look, he shook his head. No, it's just a soul avatar. Boy, what is your relationship with the soul race? I can barely be considered a half-clansman of the soul race, Lu Yi replied casually. The little old man's eyes twitched obviously. What was this? What did he mean by barely be considered a half-clansman of the soul race? If he was, then he was. If he wasn't, then he wasn't. But seeing that there was such a divine lotus in the other party's divine sea, he knew that his relationship with the soul race was not ordinary. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to have such a treasure guarding his divine sea. Just as he was contemplating though, Lu Yi said, Old Fong, the Battle of Black Abyss has begun, and it won't be long before the people from St. Blood Peak arrive. I want to use this battle to kill them all. What kind of help can Old Fong provide? The little old man was stunned for a moment before realizing that Old Fong had called him Old Fong because of the name Minuscule Mountain. No one had ever called him this before, so he was surprised for a moment, but he didn't care much about it. Hearing this, he slowly shook his head. My essence has been contaminated by the blood ancestors' precious blood. For many years, this old master has been fighting against it. If it weren't for your help today, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to come here to see you. Once the battle begins, all this old master can do is expel the invading enemy with all his strength. Lu Yi understood and was a little disappointed, but after thinking about it, he couldn't ask for too much. Feng Lao's origin had been contaminated by a portion of the blood ancestors' precious blood's power for so many years, and with his help today, Feng Lao's origin consciousness was able to relax for a moment. However, he definitely couldn't continue to relax like this. Elder Feng had sensed that Lu Yi was different from the others, so he had purposely shown himself to meet him. Therefore, in the Battle of the Black Abyss, he still had to rely on himself. Brat, don't think you can eat until you're fat. Win this battle first, and then help me resolve the danger of the source core. Only then can we plan for the future. Elder Feng's voice rang out. The danger of the source core had only been slightly weakened, but it hadn't been completely resolved. This wasn't something that could be accomplished in a single day. The source core that had been contaminated by a portion of the blood ancestors' precious blood's power was like suffering from an illness. As the saying goes, illness comes like a landslide, but it goes away like silk. From Elder Feng's point of view, it was unrealistic for Lu Yi to want to exterminate St. Blood Mountain in a single battle. This kind of thing could only be done slowly. Lu Yi frowned. He didn't want to plan for the future. Right now, he just wanted to settle everything with a single battle. After thinking for a moment, Lu Yi asked, Elder Feng, that blood ancestor's precious blood, does it have its own consciousness? The reason for this guess was naturally because of all the thoughts that had flashed through his mind before. If the consciousness that had swallowed him into this world wasn't Heart Mountain's consciousness, then there was only one other possibility. Elder Feng nodded and said, That's right, but don't worry too much. That consciousness isn't complete. It should have been born from the remnant will of the blood ancestors' precious blood. That's why its intelligence is a bit hazy, like a child that hasn't been born for long. Moreover, this is the source core space, so it can't enter. Only cultivators like you can enter. After obtaining a definite answer from Elder Feng, even though Lu Yi already had his suspicions, he was still shocked. He couldn't help but recall some information he had obtained when he first came into contact with the blood race's inheritance. It was rumored that the blood race's bloodline could be reborn from a single drop of blood. He had always felt that this kind of thing was too illusory, but now it seemed that he was just a frog at the bottom of a well. The blood ancestor had been dead for who knew how many years, and her remaining body had been split into many pieces. However, the drop of precious blood she had left behind had actually given birth to a consciousness. A single drop of the blood ancestor's precious blood had caused Heart Mountain's core consciousness to be in such a sorry state. Just how powerful had the blood ancestor been back then? And what kind of existence had been able to split the blood ancestor's body into pieces? Lu Yi couldn't think too deeply about this right now, because this consciousness was born from the remnant will of the blood ancestor. It must have inherited many things from the blood ancestor. Could this be considered a kind of rebirth? Elder Fong had said that the blood ancestor's drop of precious blood couldn't enter this place. As for the reason, Lu Yi didn't know, but since Elder Fong had said so, then it must be true. In other words, that drop of precious blood had always been outside. Lu Yi immediately thought of the blood moon hanging in the sky. He had always been curious about the essence of the blood moon, and had once guessed it. Now that he heard Elder Fong's words, he was almost certain that the blood moon was formed from the blood ancestor's precious blood. However, Lu Yi quickly thought of another matter. Elder Fong, if the blood ancestor's precious blood couldn't enter, then how was the origin contaminated? Naturally, it was contaminated by the divine nature of the cultivators who died here. To put it bluntly, the divine nature is an extension of the blood ancestor's precious blood's power. The precious blood's ignorant will has always been its main goal to invade the origin, so all of the divine nature's power will automatically contaminate the origin. Lu Yi came to a realization. After generations of fighting in the Black Abyss, there must have been many cultivators from the Saint Blood Mountain who had died in battle. After that, the divine nature in their bodies dissipated and slowly contaminated the origin. So kid, do your best to win this battle. After that, this old man will work with you to find a way to deal with that drop of precious blood. If anyone else had come here, Elder Fong definitely wouldn't have appeared, because it was meaningless. However, Lu Yi was different. The inheritance of the Dao Tree bloodline gave Elder Fong hope, because to the Dao Tree bloodline, there was nothing in the world that it couldn't refine, including the blood ancestor's precious blood. Lu Yi nodded. I'll do my best. Within the divine sea, Elder Fong's figure dissipated. Lu Yi opened his eyes and pressed his hand on the origin, activating the talent tree's power, and continuing to refine the power of the precious blood inside the origin. The more he refined, the lighter the pressure on the origin's consciousness would be. Everyone else was busy. Hu Dequan was overseeing everything and constantly issuing orders. There was a large space around the origin that was filled with layers of formations and killing intent. A few days later, the space suddenly began to tremble. Only then did Hu Dequan flash to Lu Ye's side. Brother, the people from the Saint Blood Mountain are coming. According to the plan, we have to hide the origin. Although this kind of concealment couldn't be maintained for too long, and would be found by the cultivators of the Saint Blood Mountain sooner or later, as the defending side, stalling for time was undoubtedly a strategy. Lu Yi understood and retreated. Hu Dequan called out, and immediately several cultivators rushed over from the left and right, setting up a concealment formation near the origin. The space continued to vibrate for half a day before it finally stopped. Lu Yi, who was hiding on a meteorite and using the formation to conceal his aura, instantly sensed a powerful divine sense sweeping over from a certain direction. It was Rizhao's divine sense. If nothing went wrong, it must be Blazing Heaven himself. The cultivators of the Saint Blood Mountain must have come out in full force. They were like this every time, but every time, they returned in defeat. This battle had lasted for countless years since ancient times. Amidst the silence of the void, murderous intent was hidden. Soon, the cultivators of the Saint Blood Mountain scattered into small groups under Blazing Heaven's orders. The first thing they had to do was to find the exact location of the origin. Only then could they target it. In the process of searching, both sides were also competing. The main purpose of the Red Talisman Association was to stall for time, But under the premise that the general direction remained unchanged, it was also necessary to kill as many enemies as possible. In an instant, a sea of blood appeared in the origin space. Searching in all directions, the cultivators of the Saint Blood Mountain hid in the sea of blood. On the meteorite, where Lu Yi was hiding, Hu Dequan was beside him with a nervous expression. "Brother, how confident are you?" In the past, at this stage, the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association usually chose to hide as much as possible because their overall strength was inferior to others, and there was no advantage in taking the initiative to attack. Moreover, the cultivators of the Saint Blood Mountain worked together to activate the Blood Sea technique, which could be used to attack and defend against enemies. It was really not easy to deal with. Unless the enemy happened to enter the range of the spirit array they had set up, they would use the power of the spirit array to launch an attack. However, the origin space was not small. Even if they entered a few days in advance, the number of spirit arrays they could set up was limited. It was completely dependent on luck to let the enemy enter the range of the spirit array. However, things were different this time. After a discussion with Hu Dequan, Lu Yi changed her previous strategy and chose a more radical approach. "Just wait," Lu Yi replied. In his perception, the position of all the blood warriors in the entire origin space was clear at a glance. This was a perception that came from his bloodline, and not his divine sense, so the range of his perception was extremely wide. Hu Dequan was a little nervous. Although he had been persuaded by Lu Yi before, when it came to this step, he could not help but feel nervous. The Red Talisman Association did not have many people, so they could not bear too much trouble. In another space, the 6 members of the Red Talisman Association, Xiang Yin, and 2 other blood warriors accepted by Lu Yi were rushing in a direction without any concealment. Xiang Yin took the lead, holding their own spirit runes, and constantly communicating with Lu Yi to determine the direction. Not long after, Xiang Yin shouted, "Prepare to meet the enemy." The others in the group raised their heads and saw a sea of blood rapidly moving in front of them, carefully searching every space in an attempt to find the location of the origin space. End of this chapter. Chapter 1799. Xiang Yin and the others didn't conceal their auras, so when they discovered the enemy also sensed their presence. This caused the Sacred Blood Mountain team to immediately rush over, as if they had been injected with chicken blood. This was their usual thinking. In the past battles of the Black Abyss, whenever the Red Talisman Association cultivators encountered the Sacred Blood Mountain team, under such circumstances, there was a high chance that they would flee. Even if they didn't flee, they would focus on restraining them. But what surprised the Sacred Blood Mountain team was that the enemies they encountered this time reacted rather strangely. They didn't flee, nor did they intend to scatter in all directions to restrain them. Instead, they charged straight at them. The distance between them rapidly closed, and both sides seemed to want to take down the other in one go. Although the leading Sacred Blood Mountain cultivator found it strange, it was already too late to change their formation at this point. The moment the two teams collided, the vast sea of blood suddenly became restless. Within the sea of blood, the expressions of the Sacred Blood Mountain cultivators changed drastically. The leader even turned around and stared in a certain direction as he roared, "Zhao Bingli, how dare you betray us?" The sea of blood's turbulence wasn't caused by the enemy, but by their own side. This was something that the Sacred Blood Mountain cultivators could clearly feel. This secret technique where multiple cultivators use blood arts together, and then fuse together to form a sea of blood, was the most common method used by the blood race against their enemies. This was because after the sea of blood fused together, it would become larger and more powerful. It could even be said that even Constellation Realm cultivators would be able to display their usefulness in such a situation, and provide some assistance to the stronger cultivators on their side. However, there was still a problem that needed to be resolved when using blood arts like this, and that was the suppression of their holiness. If everyone didn't possess holiness, then it would naturally be easy, as no one would be able to suppress the other. If only one of the blood race members in the team possessed holiness, Then it would be simple. That person would be able to preside over the sea of blood, and the other blood race members would assist him. But for the sacred blood mountain cultivators, everyone possessed holiness, so only the one with the strongest holiness could preside over the sea of blood, while the other cultivators restrained their holiness and assisted him. The sacred restraining technique was a secret technique of the blood race that was specially used in such situations. By activating this technique, the blood race members could restrain their holiness and prevent the situation of everyone suppressing and interfering with each other. But at the moment when the Saint Blood Mountain team was about to clash with the enemy, Zhao Bingli, who was in the team, suddenly did not restrain his holiness. What made the other cultivators even more shocked and puzzled was that Zhao Bingli's holiness was actually stronger than all of them. This was simply unimaginable. The strength of a Saint Blood Mountain cultivator's holiness was basically related to how long they had been in this realm. The longer they had been in this realm, the stronger their holiness would be. This was because they could bathe in more blood rain and refine more of the resources produced by this realm. Although Zhao Bingli's time in this world was not the shortest, it was not the longest either. There were many people with stronger holiness than him. Therefore, no one knew why his holiness had suddenly skyrocketed to such an extent. The only thing he was certain of was that Zhao Bingli's actions were undoubtedly a betrayal of Saint Blood Peak. When the balance of the Blood Sea was broken, the Red Talisman Association's team charged over under the lead of Xiang Yin and her sister. In the next instant, a holiness even stronger than Zhao Bingli's spread out. The already turbulent Blood Sea became even more fragile and collapsed with a loud bang. The cultivators of Saint Blood Peak that were hiding within the Sea of Blood revealed themselves in a sorry state, and all of them had unsightly expressions. Moreover, the thing that caused them to feel even more terrified was that the members of the Red Talisman Association had already arrived, and it just so happened that their magic energy was in a suppressed state. After an incense stick's worth of time, Hu Duquan's eyes suddenly widened. His face was filled with disbelief. He turned to look at Lu Yi, his lips trembling. Annihilated. Brother, Xiang Yin's team has annihilated a Saint Blood Mountain team. He had undoubtedly received a message from the other side. Got it. Lu Yi nodded. He had also received the message from Xiang Yin. Lu Yi was not surprised by this result. In the year since he entered this realm, he had been refining his own precious blood. But so far, he did not have a single drop left in his body. He had used all of it to subdue blood servants. In addition to Xiang Yin and Yu Yao who had been following him all this time, there were also several blood servants hidden in Saint Blood Mountain. Today's battle was the time to use these hidden blood servants. Each blood servant had refined a drop of his precious blood, and Xiang Yin and her sister had refined 1.5 drops. In terms of pure holiness, there were very few in Saint Blood Mountain who could compare to them. Hiding in the dark, the blood servants suddenly turned against him at a critical moment. Coupled with the suppression of their bloodline, it was not surprising that they could achieve such a result. Hu Duquan was extremely excited because the Red Talisman Association had never fought such a satisfying battle in the Battle of Blackwater in the past. Even if they were able to occupy an advantage in small-scale battles, it was absolutely impossible for them to annihilate all their enemies. Such a good start was enough to raise everyone's spirits. He secretly rejoiced. Fortunately, he had reached a consensus with Lu Yi before the battle and chose to believe in him. Otherwise, how could such a good thing happen? Without Lu Yi's help, the Red Talisman Association would likely continue on its old path. After pondering for a moment, Hu Duquan said, "Brother, I'll leave this battle to you. We'll fight however you want." At this moment, he no longer doubted Lu Yi's determination to fight against Saint Blood Mountain and decided to hand over his command to Lu Yi. After all, having two voices in one team wasn't good. After saying that, he stood up and stretched his body, looking like he was about to go all out. He flashed out of his hiding place and said, "I'm going to kill the enemy too." Atop the meteorite, Lu Yi watched him leave without stopping him, continuing to sense the positions of the blood servants and sending out a series of messages. The blood warriors in the two camps moved closer to each other. In another direction, Another team from St. Blood Mountain encountered the same misfortune as the previous team, but this time, the ones leading the attack were not Xiang Yin and her sister, but Wang Taixing and Zhou Ran. Although Wang Taixing and Zhou Ran's holiness was slightly worse than Xiang Yin and her sisters, under the premise that they were unprepared for this battle, it wasn't difficult for them to win. Time passed by, and under Lu Ye's overall command, the scattered teams from St. Blood Mountain suffered one disaster after another. Once this happened, none of them could escape the fate of being wiped out. Such news spread among the Red Talisman Association cultivators, causing many of them who were accustomed to hard times to feel both incredulous and excited. In the past, they had always been the passive party, never having expected that one day they would be able to take the initiative to attack, and every time, they would easily achieve great results. The gap in numbers between the two sides was constantly shrinking, and the contrast in overall strength was no longer so great. For a moment, all the cultivators on their side couldn't help feeling that they had the upper hand. Only Lu Yi, who was responsible for overseeing the rear, felt a trace of unease in his heart, because although the battle was progressing smoothly, in reality, the enemy's strongest master had yet to appear. Blazing Heaven must have already arrived in this space. Lu Yi could feel his radiant aura from afar, but what puzzled him was that Blazing Heaven had not moved from his original position since he arrived. No matter how many of his subordinates were injured, Blazing Heaven remained indifferent to them. According to the information provided by the blood servants hidden in St. Blood Mountain, Blazing Heaven didn't even give any direct instructions to the cultivators under his command. He was like a spectator, watching this farce from afar. No matter who won or lost, it didn't affect him in the slightest. There must be a reason for this abnormality. If they wanted to win this battle, Blazing Heaven was the key. Only by killing him could they be considered a true victory. If Blazing Heaven didn't die, even if all the cultivators of St. Blood Mountain died, they still wouldn't be able to win. While he was deep in thought, a ferocious aura suddenly erupted from a certain direction. Lu Ye's expression turned cold as he turned his head to look in that direction. Even from an unknown distance, he could still see a red light blooming in that direction. In his bloodline perception, he could sense that two of his blood servants had disappeared without a trace in that direction. The power of the Red Talisman. According to the information he obtained from Hu Dequan, after so many years, several cultivators with red talismans couldn't hold on to the ideals in their hearts, and betrayed the Red Talisman Association, turning to side with St. Blood Mountain. But after one battle after another, only one of these people was still alive. Originally, there were two, however, the other one was killed by Lu Yi at Snow Listening Peak. The Red Talisman was undoubtedly a great killing weapon for any side, so it wouldn't be used lightly. But now, the Red Talisman's might was being activated, so it was obvious that the cultivator with the Red Talisman had been forced into a desperate situation. The two blood warriors under his command had been killed by Yang Kai. Soon, news came from the battlefield. Not only were his two blood servants killed by the Red Talisman Association, but also 3 members of the Red Talisman Association, all of whom were in the Yuyao realm. Since the beginning of the battle, this was the first time they had suffered losses. They had lost 5 people in one go, which was a huge loss. However, the enemy didn't have it easy either. The enemy team had been completely wiped out, so it could be considered as revenge. Lu Yi pondered for a moment, then sent a message out. "Brother, we can move out now. Be careful." In another direction, Yang Ling, who had been hibernating and conserving his strength, suddenly opened his eyes. He checked the sound talisman's message but didn't respond. He stood up and rushed forward. That direction was where Blazing Heaven was. In the past, every time in the Battle of the Black Abyss, it was Yang Ling who restrained Blazing Heaven, because he was the only one with 2 red talismans on the Red Talisman Association's side, one for attack and one for defense. After many years of nourishment, any red talisman was no weaker than sunshine, so even if his cultivation was much lower, it was no problem for him to restrain Blazing Heaven. Yang Ling was already familiar with this. This time was no exception. Lu Yi was very concerned about Blazing Heaven, and wanted to know what he was doing at the moment, but he couldn't investigate it himself, because once he met Blazing Heaven, it was very likely that he would be forced to reveal the strength of his divine attribute. Before he really fought with Blazing Heaven, Lu Yi didn't want to expose this point, so he could only trouble Yang Ling to make a trip. End of chapter. Chapter 1800. In the void, Yang Ling's figure moved with a solemn expression. As he approached Blazing Heaven's position, his body began to emit a faint red light, as if a layer of blood mist had enveloped him. The red light became brighter and brighter, and its power became more and more intense. Blazing Heaven, who had been standing quietly in place, finally sensed something. He turned his head to look in Yang Ling's direction, and a disdainful sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. Finally, Yang Ling stood 300 kilometers away from Blazing Heaven, his body glowing with red light. The power of the red talisman had been pushed to the extreme, and it could be activated at any time. The powerful aura caused Yang Ling's clothes to flutter and his hair to fly. He stared at Blazing Heaven with a solemn and focused expression. If Blazing Heaven made any inappropriate moves, the power of the red talisman would be activated immediately. Their eyes met, and Blazing Heaven raised his hand slightly, pointing it at Yang Ling, then crooked his finger and said in a mocking voice, "Do you dare?" Yang Ling didn't respond, even though besides him, Hu Duquan and Meng Su both possessed a red talisman each. But these were the few red talismans left in their red talisman association. Every single one of them used would be one less, so he really didn't dare take the initiative to make a move. The power of the red talisman was terrifying, but he wasn't sure if it could kill a Rizhao. However, once he activated the red talisman, if Blazing Heaven didn't die, he would die without a doubt. He didn't dare to take the risk, so even if Blazing Heaven ridiculed and provoked him, he just ignored it and did his job well. Seeing Yang Ling not moving, Blazing Heaven snorted softly and ignored him. He spread out his divine sense, and could clearly sense that the cultivators under his command were dying. But he still didn't do anything, and only had an unfathomable expression on his face. In the end, Lu Yi still took action. The blood servants he had planted in St. Blood Mountain were exposed one after another, and the St. Blood Mountain team also realized that something was wrong, so they became more cautious. Of course, this wasn't the main reason he was forced to take action. The main reason was that there were a few cultivators on St. Blood Mountain's side, and their divine nature was so strong that even Xiang Yin and her sister couldn't compare. These cultivators were the ones who'd been in this world for the longest time. They'd bathed in blood rain for an entire few thousands of years, and refined various resources, allowing them to accumulate a sufficiently impressive amount of dense saint aura within their bodies. With such a cultivator leading them, the Sacred Blood Mountain no longer had to endure the suppression of the Sacred Blood Mountain. As a result, the Red Talisman Association's team was unable to quickly exterminate their enemies like they had in the beginning. Once the war broke out, it would be incomparably intense. There were casualties on the enemy's side, but there were also casualties on their side. Fortunately, the strength of the St. Blood Mountain had been constantly weakened. Otherwise, the current situation would be very disadvantageous for the Red Talisman Association. Somewhere on the battlefield, the battle was extremely intense. The figures of the Red Talisman Association's cultivators flashed as they continuously evaded the Sea of Blood. At the same time, they executed various techniques. The cultivators of the St. Blood Mountain were hidden in the Sea of Blood. With the Sea of Blood as their base, they had the absolute upper hand. Xiang Yin and Xiang Yin were in a sorry state, and they didn't dare get too close to the Sea of Blood at all. Because the St. Blood Mountain's cultivator that controlled the Sea of Blood was stronger than them in terms of Saint Aura. Once they were swallowed by the Sea of Blood, then they would definitely perish. Suddenly, a flowing light flashed over swiftly from a certain direction. Xiang Yin and Xiang Yin were shocked when they sensed this familiar aura. The Exalt Master has arrived. They'd been stalling for time all along, because they were waiting for this moment. They'd personally experienced how terrifying Lu Ye's Saint Aura was, so they naturally knew what would happen next. They immediately sent out their divine perception to the cultivators on their side and told them to prepare to counterattack. After that, they saw Lu Yi didn't stop and charge headfirst into the sea of blood. In the next instant, exclaims of shock resounded. Even if they were very far away, their bodies still went weak when the terrifying Saint Aura erupted. The entire sea of blood rumbled as it collapsed, revealing the figures of almost 10 cultivators that were hidden within it. All of them were at a loss for what to do and had terrified expressions. When they saw this, how could the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association, who'd received the instructions via voice transmission from Xiang Yin, and Xiang Yin wouldn't hesitate, and they seized this opportunity to pounce forward. Lu Ye's dense Saint Aura continued to surge as he held his saber horizontally in front of him. Saber light flickered as he unleashed a massacre. After the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association pounced over, the originally anxious battle immediately turned into a one-sided slaughter. After a short while, the battlefield quieted down. Lu Yi turned his head to look at Xiang Yin and Xiang Yin, who were standing in the distance. He discovered that although they were injured, they weren't seriously injured. They were just in a sorry state. Without stopping, Lu Ye's figure flashed and pounced in another direction. In that direction, a similarly anxious battle was erupting, and it was abnormally fierce. As time passed, the teams of St. Blood Mountain were eliminated one after another. The overall strength of both sides went from being crushed to gradually reaching a balance, and then the tables turned. In just a short 2 days, almost all the cultivators of St. Blood Mountain had been slaughtered. On a meteorite, Hu Duquan, who was covered in blood, returned and landed beside Lu Yi. Although he looked a little tired, his spirit was extremely high. "Brother, you've really made a good plan." There had never been a battle in the Black Abyss where the Red Talisman Association had such a satisfying victory. Although they had suffered some losses, and the losses weren't small, after this battle, the wings of blazing heaven on St. Blood Mountain's side were almost completely cut off. In just 2 short days, Hu Duquan had witnessed Lu Ye's terrifying ability to dispatch and kill the enemy. Any order he gave would cause a team of St. Blood Mountain to suffer. If it weren't for Lu Yi, this battle wouldn't have gone so smoothly. Lu Yi turned his head and glanced at him. "Blazing heaven is still alive." Hu Duquan nodded solemnly. "So we still have to deal with him. Only by dealing with him could this battle be considered a true victory. And in the future, St. Blood Mountain would no longer exist in this region." While speaking, Hu Duquan frowned again. "But brother, I feel that something is not quite right." Lu Ye's eyes flashed. "What's wrong?" "Blazing heaven hasn't made any moves. I went to take a look from afar." Although Yang Ling used the power of the Red Talisman to restrain him, logically speaking, with St. Blood Mountain's heavy losses, Blazing Heaven shouldn't have done nothing. But since he entered here, he hasn't moved. "I'm afraid he's up to something." Lu Yi nodded. "He's definitely up to something. Right now, no one knows what he's planning, but there's one thing. His subordinates are almost all dead. No matter what he's planning, he has no one he can use. Rizhao is terrifying, but he's alone. We still have more than 30 people, so if we work together, we should be able to take him down." Hu Duquan thought about it seriously for a moment, then agreed. "You're right." At this moment, Lu Ye's sound talisman trembled slightly. He checked it and said, "The last team of St. Blood Mountain has been destroyed. It's time to deal with Blazing Heaven." Hu Duquan's expression turned solemn. "Let's go. I've nurtured that red talisman for many years. It's time for it to see the light of day." The two of them flew forward together. Lu Ye's gaze was deep as he looked forward, the uneasiness in his heart growing stronger. He had no way of guessing what Blazing Heaven was planning, although he had secretly subdued some St. Blood Mountain cultivators and inadvertently discovered another secret. He knew nothing about Blazing Heaven. In this battle, even if Blazing Heaven was tied down by Yang Ling and couldn't personally take action, why didn't the St. Blood Mountain teams gather together after sensing that the situation was not right? Why did they continue to wander around in small groups? Logically speaking, if they gathered together, their ability to protect themselves would be much greater. However, they didn't do so. Their scattering undoubtedly gave the other side an opportunity to take them down one by one. In addition, Lu Yi didn't believe that Blazing Heaven didn't take action purely because he was tied down by Yang Ling. If he were in Blazing Heaven's position, with so many of his subordinates dead, he would have to give it his all. As long as he could withstand Yang Ling's red talisman, then he could take the lives of anyone on this battlefield. As Lu Yi and Hu Duquan flew towards Blazing Heaven's position, the other cultivators on their side also received orders to gather together. The faces of all the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association were filled with excitement because they'd never experienced such a satisfying battle. In the past, every single time they went against the Saint Blood Mountain, they'd always been at an absolute disadvantage, and they'd always been forced to hide. However, this time, so many cultivators of Saint Blood Mountain had been killed by them. They hadn't even used many of the formations they had set up before, and the location of the origin source had never been exposed. Now Blazing Heaven was the only one left in Saint Blood Mountain. Although there was no sunlight on their side, they had several red talismans and many cultivators who were still alive. Even if they used their lives, they could take down Blazing Heaven. They would definitely win this battle. In the void, Blazing Heaven was still standing there quietly. 300 kilometers away, Yang Ling was secretly activating the might of the red talisman as a deterrent. Even though he already knew that almost all the cultivators of Saint Blood Mountain had been killed, he didn't dare to relax in the slightest. His eyes were fixed on Blazing Heaven. If Blazing Heaven made any inappropriate movements, the red talisman's might would be activated immediately. Suddenly, Blazing Heaven looked at Yang Ling with a puzzled expression. "How did you do it?" Yang Ling became even more vigilant. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "What?" Blazing Heaven said slowly. "On the surface, my Saint Blood Mountain is several times stronger than your Red Talisman Association. How did you kill all the cultivators under my command? Also, what methods did you use to instigate those traitors?" He stood there and spread out his divine sense. Although he could sense the withering of life, he couldn't investigate the specific situation of the battle, so he was really curious. He could sense that there were cultivators under his command who had betrayed him, and there was more than one of them. However, those traitors shouldn't have affected the overall trend of the battle. "Do you think I'll answer you?" Yang Ling replied coldly. Blazing Heaven sighed. "Forget it. If you don't want to say it, then don't say it. It doesn't matter." His dispirited appearance made Yang Ling frown. He instinctively felt that something was wrong, but he didn't dare to think too deeply about it, lest he become absent-minded. End of chapter. Chapter 1801. All of a sudden, Yang Ling detected a familiar aura quickly approaching him, and he became spirited. A moment later, two figures stood not far from him. They were Lu Yi and Hu Duquan, who had rushed over at the first moment. Soon another team, led by Meng Su, arrived and assembled. After a while, the scattered Red Talisman Association cultivators gathered. Compared to before the battle, there were a dozen fewer people, and most of them were Red Talisman Association cultivators. Lu Ye's blood servants had also lost a few. Moreover, after 2 days of battle, almost everyone was not in peak condition. Some of them had not even recovered from their injuries. Even so, there were still nearly 30 people left. Looking at Blazing Heaven, Hu Duquan's face was filled with resentment. He couldn't help but think back to all the years he had spent fighting against the Saint Blood Peak. He roared, "Blazing Heaven, your time of death has come." He thought that Blazing Heaven would still be stubborn despite the situation. After all, he was facing Rizhao. Unexpectedly, he nodded and said, "Yes, you are really impressive." As he spoke, his gaze swept across the front, pausing slightly on Lu Yi. He revealed a puzzled expression, because he had never seen Lu Yi before. However, he didn't seem to care too much and quickly moved away. Blazing Heaven's calmness made Hu Duquan frown. Recalling what Lu Yi had said to him, he couldn't help but shout, "What are you planning?" Blazing Heaven laughed. "My subordinates have all been killed by you, and I'm restrained here by your red talisman. What can I do? I'm just standing here waiting for death." Hu Duquan said angrily, "If you really want to die, why don't you commit suicide? Otherwise, you'll die a horrible death." Blazing Heaven raised his eyebrows. Why not? Hu Dequan opened his mouth, but didn't know what to say. Of course, he wasn't naive enough to believe that Rizhao would commit suicide. Meng Su said coldly, "There's no need to talk nonsense with him. Just kill him. As long as he's dead, no matter what scheme he has, it'll be useless." As he spoke, he raised his hand, and a dazzling red light bloomed at his fingertips. Hearing this, Hu Dequan nodded. "Do it." He also activated the power of his red talisman. Lu Ye's eyes flashed, and he also activated the power of the red talisman. All of a sudden, 4 streaks of red light blossomed in unison, and a terrifying might swept through the surroundings. Even though all of the cultivators present were Yu Yao, they couldn't help but feel their bodies and minds sway uncontrollably. All they could do was channel their power to protect themselves. After a short while, the power of their respective red talismans was pushed to the limit. To everyone's surprise, Blazing Heaven continued to stand there quietly, as if he didn't move at all. Instead, he looked at everyone with a pitiful expression. "Kill!" Hu Dequan roared as he activated the power of his red talisman. The red light condensed and transformed into a sharp blade that slashed towards Blazing Heaven. At the same time, Yang Ling attacked as well. His red talisman transformed into a ferocious and terrifying primordial ferocious beast. It was lifelike, and it roared as it charged towards Blazing Heaven like a bolt of lightning. The horn on its forehead flickered with red light, as if it could destroy everything in the world. Meng Su's red talisman was slightly different from the other two. It was purely a huge palm print, and with every inch it pressed down, even the space around it was shattered. Hu Dequan and Yang Ling, who were the first to attack, suddenly turned their heads and looked at Meng Su in astonishment. Their eyes were filled with disbelief. At the same time, the expressions of the cultivators standing beside Lu Yi changed drastically. They suddenly felt as if a great disaster was about to befall them. An incomparably strong aura of death lingered around them, causing their bodies to stiffen. They instinctively wanted to dodge, but the space around them had frozen. Lu Yi sighed. When the red light spread out, a layer of red light enveloped his body, turning into a solid defense. The huge palm print pressed down. The 7 or 8 cultivators of the Red Talisman Association beside Lu Yi could only barely resist for a moment before their bodies exploded and died with despair. Even Lu Ye's bones creaked from the pressure of the palm print. The red light on his body dimmed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Although he had activated the defensive red talisman with the help of his precious blood, Meng Su's red talisman had been nourished for too long. Its power was incomparably terrifying. It seemed that the defensive red talisman alone was somewhat difficult to resist. Meng Su's expression was also astonished because he didn't expect that the red talisman that Lu Yi had activated was actually used for defense. Logically speaking, everyone should have activated the offensive red talisman at this time. After all, they had to join forces to kill Blazing Heaven. However, before the red talisman's power was fully activated, he didn't know what type of red talisman Lu Yi had activated. He only had his own preconceived judgment. He was just a little puzzled. Why would Lu Yi activate the defensive red talisman at this time? What was he guarding against? "What are you doing?" Yang Ling roared. Although he had already made a judgment, he still couldn't believe it. That was his brother who had been with him for 2,000 years. He didn't understand why Lu Yi would do this, nor did he know when Lu Yi had changed sides. Before this, neither he nor Hu Dequan had noticed at all. As Yang Ling's words fell, Lu Yi, who was wrapped in a dim red light, finally moved. He activated the vertical sweep technique. Everyone only felt their vision blur, followed by the flash of a blade. When they came back to their senses, Lu Yi was already standing not far from Meng Su. The smear of blood on his pitch-black long blade was extremely eye-catching. It could be said that Meng Su had been caught off guard. From his point of view, when he activated the red talisman, Lu Yi and many of the cultivators around him would have been reduced to dust. No Yu Yao could survive the power of such a red talisman. However, Lu Yi had activated the defensive red talisman and blocked this terrifying blow, saving his life. Meng Su staggered back, his hand clutching his chest. He could clearly feel that his internal organs had been completely pulverized. Lu Ye's blade was incomparably fast and ferocious. It had directly cut off his chances of survival. However, with the powerful vitality of a late-stage Yu Yao, he wouldn't die so quickly. Feeling the arrival of death like this was undoubtedly an extremely torturous and terrifying thing. He looked at Lu Yi in disbelief. How did you find out? When he should have activated the offensive red talisman, Lu Yi had activated the defensive red talisman. This was clearly a precaution, so Meng Su understood that Lu Yi must have sensed something. Lu Yi turned a deaf ear to his question, nor did he have any intention of explaining. He only looked regretfully at the place where the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association had been standing beside him just now. There was only a pile of dismembered corpses left. When he had secretly subdued Zhou Tianbao, Lu Yi had already learned of a secret. Blazing Heaven had planted a spy in the Red Talisman Association. However, Zhou Tianbao didn't know who this person was. Lu Yi had been secretly investigating the Red Talisman Association during his time in contact with them, but to no avail. He hadn't been able to find any clues about the various conflicts with the Saint Blood Mountain. He only knew that this spy was extremely well hidden, and there was a high probability that this spy was one of the leaders of the Red Talisman Association. This was because an ordinary cultivator wouldn't be able to overthrow the Red Talisman Association. Yang Ling, Hu Duquan, and Meng Su were all under his suspicion. However, he couldn't say this out loud. If he did, it would only make them suspect his motives. Compared to a cultivator tainted by the divine attribute, the Red Talisman Association would undoubtedly trust their own cultivator more. It was only when Meng Su impatiently activated the Red Talisman that Lu Yi vaguely came to a conclusion. However, there was one thing that Lu Yi couldn't understand. Meng Su definitely hadn't been tainted by the divine attribute, because when he activated the divine attribute, he hadn't been suppressed at all. Since that was the case, why would he cooperate with Blazing Heaven and submit to him? Moreover, this should have happened in the last 10 years. Otherwise the Red Talisman Association would have been long gone. Why? Hu Duquan's gaze trembled as he looked at Meng Su. His face was extremely pale. Meng Su's sudden betrayal left him at a loss of who he could trust in this world. Meng Su's vitality was extremely dim. He looked at Hu Duquan for a long time before saying, "We can't win. I just want to live." Hu Duquan's gaze became unfocused, and then he flew into a rage. Blazing Heaven is going to die soon. After so many years of conflict, there will be an end to it. Who told you that we can't win? Meng Su opened his mouth, as if he wanted to say something, but his vitality was completely extinguished at this moment. Hu Duquan's face was filled with grief, and Yang Ling wasn't any better. The remaining Red Talisman Association cultivators were all paranoid. No one knew if there was a hidden traitor among them. Blazing Heaven isn't dead. Lu Ye's calm voice rang out. Only then did Hu Duquan and Yang Ling come back to their senses. They turned to look at Blazing Heaven. The power of the red talismans had dissipated, but what they saw made their eyes shrink. Blazing Heaven was indeed not dead, although he looked a little battered. After all, he had blocked the power of 2 red talismans by himself. It was inevitable that he would be injured. Even his aura was somewhat weak. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and suddenly laughed loudly. His laughter was filled with mockery. "You still want to win? Meng Su is right. You can't win. He joined me because he saw the truth, but you are all deceived by the falsehood." He stopped laughing, and his voice became stern. "No one can win." "Blood Sea!" Lu Yi shouted, and took the initiative to activate the Blood Sea technique. Xiang Yin and the others came back to their senses, and they all dove into the Blood Sea. As their blood chi was activated, the Blood Sea, which was already quite large, suddenly expanded in all directions, enveloping the group of Red Talisman Association cultivators. "Focus, kill Blazing Heaven first." Lu Ye's voice rang in the ears of the Red Talisman Association cultivators. Hu Duquan then shouted, "Kill Blazing Heaven." The Blood Sea surged, and in an instant, it covered a radius of 1,000 miles, and quickly spread towards Blazing Heaven's position. Strangely, Blazing Heaven didn't have any intention of dodging the Blood Sea's attack. Instead, he had a crazed look on his face. He opened his arms and made a hugging gesture, and shouted wildly, Good, good. In the next instant, his entire body was enveloped by the blood sea. Chapter 1802. The sea of blood surged, and his magic power fluctuated. Lu Yi had pushed his saint nature to the limit. With him in the lead, the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association, as well as a group of blood servants, madly besieged blazing heaven in the sea of blood. Although they had suffered heavy losses in this battle, there were still more than 20 people alive, and all of them were Yu Yao. If blazing heaven was at his peak, these cultivators alone might not be able to do anything to him. After all, he was Rizhao. It was like more than 20 star mansions fighting against one Yu Yao. If they didn't form an array, they would be easily defeated one by one. Moreover, blazing heaven's cultivation was higher, so he could fight whenever he wanted and escape whenever he wanted. He had an absolute advantage. However, under the suppression of Lu Ye's saint nature, blazing heaven's strength was greatly reduced. With the sea of blood sealing the area, he was doomed to die. However, the strange thing was that even in such a desperate situation, blazing heaven didn't panic at all. Instead, he laughed wildly. Facing the attacks from all directions, he didn't show any intention of defending. Instead, he met attacks with attacks. He didn't seem to care about his own life at all. The uneasiness in Lu Ye's heart had reached its peak. He was certain that blazing heaven still had something up his sleeve. Otherwise, how could the dignified Rizhao act like he wanted to die? Moreover, the words he said before were also thought-provoking. However, at this point in the battle there was no turning back. No matter what blazing heaven's trump card was, he had to be killed first. The result of not defending was that blazing heaven's body continued to be injured. His flesh began to disintegrate, revealing his white bones. Casualties also appeared on his side. Under the suppression of Lu Ye's saint nature, blazing heaven's strength was far from his peak. However, the biggest difference between Rizhao and Yu Yao wasn't the increase in their physique or magic power, but their soul. In comparison, Rizhao's soul strength had reached a whole new level. Lu Yi could suppress his physical strength, but he couldn't suppress his soul strength. This led to the cultivators on his side being caught by Li Shang. Even if they didn't die, they would be injured. His terrifying soul power fluctuated wildly, constantly playing the sad song of death. Seeing the situation like this, Lu Yi didn't dare to delay any longer. He made a prompt decision and quickly retreated, far away from the area where the fierce battle was taking place. At the same time, he activated his magic power, and a red light bloomed. Before he set off, the humanoid tribe had given him 3 red talismans. One was for attack, one was for defense, and the last one was for escape. It could be said to be extremely thorough. He had already used the defensive red talisman earlier, and now he was activating the offensive red talisman. Nightclubs were full of dreams. He wanted to use the red talisman to settle everything in one battle. Red light flashed, and even the luster of the blood sea could not hide this dazzling color. Lu Ye's aura rose crazily, and his clothes trembled. The red light seemed to have a life of its own as it flowed towards the Pan Mountain saber in his hand. In the blink of an eye, the originally pitch-black Pan Mountain saber turned into a blood-red saber. Lu Yi held the saber in his hand, a powerful belief that everything in this world could be severed with a single slash of the saber appeared in his heart. Under the support of the red talisman, the Pan Mountain saber trembled. Lu Yi raised his other hand and gripped the saber's hilt with both hands. His spiritual sense surged in all directions as his body shot forward. After receiving his voice transmission, the cultivators who had been attacking blazing heaven quickly retreated in all directions. At this moment, blazing heaven, whose body was riddled with wounds, raised his head and looked towards Lu Yi. Even though he was separated by the sea of blood, he could still feel the ferocious power of the saber. He was still not afraid. The blood sea's powerful restrictive force was obviously afraid that he would escape, and so it wanted to bind him to the spot. However, he had no intention of escaping. Instead, he crazily surged his spiritual sense and attacked Lu Yi. In an instant, Lu Yi's spiritual sense was in turmoil. Fortunately, he had the rainbow god Lotus to protect his spiritual sense. Therefore, He was able to withstand the attack of Blazing Heaven's spiritual sense. His body was wrapped in the red light. In the blink of an eye, he had covered a distance of 100 miles. The blood-red saber slashed down fiercely. Lu Yi wanted to activate his saber's power. However, under the support of the red talisman, the saber's power was too ferocious. He could not activate any saber's power. It was a simple and unadorned saber slash. After a slight tremor, the enormous sea of blood was instantly split apart like a piece of bloody tofu. The blood-red saber chi stretched for thousands of kilometers, as if it wanted to cut open this space. Everywhere it passed, the meteorites and floating continents were reduced to dust. Muffled groans sounded. The blood servants had been hit by the saber chi, and all of them had turned pale. Although Lu Yi was the master of the blood sea, the blood servants had always been supporting him. When the saber slashed open the blood sea, they also suffered a backlash. The cultivators of the Red Talisman Association did not suffer any backlash, but under the powerful shockwaves, they were unable to stabilize themselves. It was not until several breaths later that the dazzling red light gradually disappeared. Everyone immediately looked towards Blazing Heaven. They wanted to know the result of this saber slash. What they saw excited them. This was because where Blazing Heaven had been, there was no longer a body of flesh and blood. There was only a skeleton left. Blazing Heaven was dead. Lu Yi stood not far from the skeleton. The mountain saber in his hand was still in a slashing posture. His brows were tightly furrowed. The situation was not right. The saber slash just now was so powerful that it was impossible for Blazing Heaven, who was suppressed by the divine attribute and heavily injured, to survive. This was something Lu Yi had expected. But why were his skeletal remains preserved? Logically speaking, even if the saber slash could not reduce Blazing Heaven to dust, it should have at least cut him in half. But his skeleton was unreasonably hard. Under such a slash, there was no trace of damage. Lu Yi looked over, and could not help but narrow his eyes. He discovered that on the eerie white bones, there were actually many crisscrossing and extremely complicated veined patterns spread out. The key was that these veined patterns gave him an incomparably familiar feeling. These were the patterns of the Blood Eye Spirit tattoo. They covered every corner of Blazing Heaven's skeleton. Looking at these patterns, Lu Yi could not help but recall a piece of information he had heard from Zhou Tianbao. Blazing Heaven had been cultivating a secret technique, and had only achieved some small success a few months ago. When he heard this news, Lu Yi immediately thought of the Blood Eye Spirit tattoo. This thing had appeared with the appearance of the blood moon. If he could observe it, so could others. If there was a secret technique in this world that could interest a person like Blazing Heaven, it would undoubtedly be the Blood Eye Spirit tattoo that had appeared with the blood moon. When he was fighting with Blazing Heaven, Lu Yi had been wary of this, because he had personally tried to activate the Blood Eye Spirit tattoo, and knew how strange it was. But in fact, Blazing Heaven had not shown any signs of activating the Blood Eye Spirit tattoo. Lu Yi had not expected that Blazing Heaven would actually brand this Blood Eye Spirit tattoo onto his skeleton. To be able to accomplish this, Blazing Heaven's attainments in the Spirit Tattoo Dao were absolutely terrifying. This kind of difficulty was not something Yang Kai could compare with when he branded the same spirit tattoo onto his talent tree. The great advantage of branding a spirit tattoo onto a leaf of a talent tree was that even if something went wrong, it could still be modified. With such convenience, as long as Lu Yi knew the specific structure of a spirit tattoo, he could easily brand it onto a leaf of his talent tree and use it for his own use. Any other method of constructing spiritual tattoos would not work. It had to be done in one go. One could imagine how difficult it was to imprint such a complicated spiritual tattoo on one's bones offline. But he had actually done it. But what was strange was that Blazing Heaven had not activated the power of this spirit tattoo from beginning to end. Moreover, neither the Red Talisman Association nor his blood warriors had mentioned that Blazing Heaven was proficient in the spirit tattoo Dao. Lu Yi suddenly had a lot of doubts in his heart, and couldn't figure out what Blazing Heaven's purpose was. But no matter what, Blazing Heaven was dead in the end. This battle they had won. Looking around, there were less than 20 cultivators left in the messy battlefield. Just now, when they were fighting with blazing heaven, he had killed a few more. One had to know that there were originally more than 40 cultivators on their side, and the Saint Blood Peak had more than 100 cultivators on their side. But in just a few days of fighting, a large number of Yu Yao and Riri had died. Those who were still alive all felt that it was unreal. However, when Lu Yi saw the joy in Hu Dequan and the others' eyes, this joy quickly turned into surprise as they stared behind him. Lu Yi suddenly turned around and looked at Blazing Heaven's skeleton. At this moment, the white skeleton was blooming with a faint red light. This red light started from the ribs and quickly spread to the rest of his body. In an instant, the spirit tattoo branded on the skeleton was activated. This incomparably strange scene made Lu Yi completely unable to understand. Logically speaking, Blazing Heaven was already dead. No matter what he had branded on his skeleton before he died, it should not have been activated. But such a thing was happening right under his nose. Without any hesitation, the mountain saber returned to its sheath. Lu Yi grasped the saber hilt with one hand and assumed the posture of drawing the saber. His eyes became focused, and his magic power began to hum. The moment the saber was unsheathed, the flesh on Lu Ye's right arm began to split open. Not only that, but his entire body also bore a tremendous burden. Saber drawing slash. A shocking saber light flashed. This was the strongest attack Lu Yi could use without using any external strength. With his middle Yu Yao cultivation, even if Blazing Heaven was still alive, such a close saber strike would not end well. But even so, this saber strike was unable to damage the skeleton in the slightest. Lu Yi could clearly feel that his saber strike was blocked by the strange red light. As the saber slashed out, the skeleton was instantly sent flying. In the surrounding space, an inexplicable strength seemed to be attracted by the skeleton, gathering towards it. Lu Yi focused his senses and quickly realized that this was the enormous blood and qi that had escaped from Blazing Heaven's body after his death. As Ri, Blazing Heaven's blood and qi was undoubtedly extremely terrifying. At this moment, the blood and qi that had already escaped was clearly attracted by some kind of power. It enveloped the skeleton and turned into a not-so-dense blood ball. End of chapter. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.